Tonight, we're exploring every creation trio mystery. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine a time before the stars were born, before the concept of distance existed, and before the very first second had ever ticked away. In the vast, silent void of the beginning, there was only a single egg. From this egg emerged the original one, the architect of all that is and all that ever will be. But the universe is a complex machine, and even a god needs pillars to hold up the sky. To give shape to the formless and direction to the eternal, 3 beings were brought into existence at the peak of a mountain that would one day pierce the clouds of the Sinjoh region. These are the masters of the dimensions, the architects of reality, and the guardians of the very fabric of our existence. We know them as Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. But who are they really? Are they merely powerful creatures that we can capture in a small metallic sphere, or are they something far more profound? When we speak of the creation trio, we aren't just talking about legendary monsters with high stats and rare typing. We are talking about the literal personification of time, the physical manifestation of space, and the dark, swirling shadow of antimatter that balances the scales of the cosmos. For decades, players have traversed the tall grass and climbed the snowy peaks of Mount Coronet, but the true depth of the lore surrounding these 3 deities remains shrouded in ancient myth and cryptic Pokédex entries. The stakes of this mystery are nothing less than the structural integrity of the Pokémon world itself. If Dialga's heart stops beating, does time simply cease to flow? If Palkia's breath falters, does the very ground beneath our feet collapse into a singular point of nothingness? And what of the 3rd brother, the one whose name was whispered in fear and eventually scrubbed from the history books of the ancient Hisuian people? Giratina represents the great other, the force that stands in opposition to everything we perceive as real. Its banishment to the Distortion world wasn't just a punishment for violence, it was a cosmic necessity. Without a place for the chaos to reside, the order of our world would be torn asunder. There is a haunting beauty in the way these 3 interact. They are a perfect trinity, yet they are locked in an eternal silent struggle. It's in the way the sky changes colour when they are summoned. We feel it in the tremors that shake the earth when their dimensions collide. But there are questions that the games only hint at. Why did Arceus create them in this specific order? Is there a hierarchy among them, or are they truly equals in the eyes of their creator? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when the balance is tipped? Throughout history, villains and heroes alike have tried to harness their power, often failing to realize that to control a member of the trio is to hold the leash of a fundamental law of physics. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of Sinjoh's ancient legends. We will look past the sprites and the battle mechanics to find the philosophical and scientific inspirations that make these 3 so compelling. We will journey from the spear pillar to the depths of the Turnback Cave, and even further back to the snowy wilds of the Hisuian region, where the myths were first written in stone. We will examine the strange relationship between the flow of time and the expansion of space, and we will confront the terrifying reality of the Distortion world, a place where gravity is a suggestion and the laws of nature are turned upside down. This is more than just a history lesson. It is a deep dive into the metaphysics of a universe we have all grown to love. It is an exploration of the divine, the scientific, and the supernatural. We will look at the subtle clues hidden in the architecture of ancient ruins and the hidden dialogue of side characters who know more than they let on. We will ask why the plates of Arceus speak of these 3 with such reverence and such caution. By the time we are through, the way you look at a clock or a map in the Pokémon world will be changed forever. The silence of the void is calling, and the secrets of the beginning are waiting to be told. Let us step through the rift and begin our journey into the heart of creation. Before there was anything, there was the absence of even the idea of anything. No light, no dark, no up or down, no before or after. The primordial cosmos was not empty in the way a room is empty when you turn off the lamp. It was empty of definition itself. There was no space to hold emptiness, no time to measure its duration. This was the silence before the concept of existence took root, a stillness so absolute that it had no name, no observer, no witness. It was not a void you could fall into. It was a void that had never known the possibility of falling, and then, from nowhere, and from everywhere at once, an egg. Not an egg in the sense of something laid, something born of a parent, but an egg as the first potential, the first seed of meaning in an ocean of non-meaning. It appeared without cause, without reason, without a previous moment to justify its arrival. That egg was the first thing that could be called a thing. It floated in the absolute nothing, containing within its shell the entirety of what would one day become reality. There was no sound to hear it, no light to see it, but the egg simply was. From that egg emerged the original one, not a creature yet, but a presence, a will that had no shape because shape had not been invented. It cracked the shell of the impossible and stepped into a cosmos that had no floor, no ceiling, no direction. This being, which we would later come to know as Arceus, was the first heartbeat of reality, and with that heartbeat, something fundamental changed. The silence began to hum. Arceus stood, if standing can apply to a being without a ground, and looked out at the uncreated expanse. And in that moment, it decided that there should be order. It did not merely wish for order, it became the architect of the laws of physics. It thought of a straight line, and the concept of distance was born. It thought of a sequence, and the concept of time followed. Each thought layered upon the previous, building a framework so precise that atoms would know where to rest, and stars would know where to burn. Arceus was not a god in the sense of ruling from a distant throne. It was the act of creation itself, woven into every number, every constant, every rule that would govern the universe. But the creation was not a single moment. It was a process, a weaving of forces that needed to be held in balance. Arceus knew that a universe of pure light would burn away all mystery, and a universe of pure void would collapse back into nothing. So it began to forge beings who could embody the very pillars of existence. These would not be mere helpers or servants. They would be the pillars themselves, and the first among them, the ones who would define the stage upon which all other stories would unfold, were still waiting in the edges of that newborn reality. For now, the silent cosmos had a master. The egg was gone, but its legacy was the first dawn, and as that dawn spread, it carried with it the promise of everything that was yet to be shaped. That promise would soon give rise to the next chapter, where the original architect would call forth the agents of space, time, and the world that exists in the cracks between them. We will explore that emergence fully in the next part of our journey, a chapter called The Birth of the Trio. But for now, rest in the knowledge that before there was any story, there was only the egg, and the egg contained everything. And so, from that single egg, the original one had emerged. But the egg itself was not the universe, it was only the seed. Arceus, the first consciousness, now stood alone in a formless, timeless, silent void. There was no light, no darkness, no up or down, no before or after. There was only the presence of a god and the infinite emptiness that surrounded it. It was not a peaceful emptiness. It was a pregnant stillness, a tension waiting to break, and break it did. The first act of creation was not a gentle unfolding, it was a shattering. At the peak of what would one day become Mount Coronet, the fabric of that primordial nothingness cracked. Imagine a sheet of black glass, perfectly smooth, stretching forever in all directions, and then from a single point, a fracture. Not a sound, because sound did not yet exist. Not a flash of light, because light had not been born, but a rupture in the very concept of absence. That rupture was the initial singularity, the moment when the infinite potential of Arceus's will collapsed into a single, infinitely dense point of creative force, and then it exploded outward. In that instant, three beings were not created one after another, but simultaneously. They did not emerge from the eruption like sparks from a fire. They were the eruption itself. They were the three pillars that would hold up the newly forming reality. And they were born equal in power, equal in purpose, and yet utterly distinct in what they embodied. The first of them became Dialga. Dialga was the pulse that gave rhythm to the chaos. Where before there was only an endless now, Dialga introduced the concept of one moment after another. Time, the ticking of a cosmic clock that would never stop. Dialga did not simply control time. Dialga was time. Every second that has ever passed, every heartbeat, every rotation of a planet, every cycle of decay and renewal, all of it flows from the being of diamond and steel that crystallized at the heart of that singularity. Without Dialga, the universe would be frozen, an eternal photograph with no story to tell. Second was Palkia. Palkia was the shape that gave form to the shapeless. Where before there was only a single unbounded expanse, Palkia introduced the concept of here and there, of inside and outside, space, the vast canvas upon which all things would be painted. Palkia did not merely govern space. Palkia was space, the stretching of distances, the curving of dimensions, the very stage upon which time would play out its endless drama. Without Palkia, the universe would have no volume, no depth, no room for galaxies to spin or for life to breathe. And then there was the third, the one that was born at the same instant, from the same shattering, but whose nature was different from the start. Giratina. If Dialga was the forward flow and Palkia was the expansive frame, then Giratina was the shadow that gave them definition. In the earliest tellings, Giratina was associated with antimatter, the opposing substance that exists in the spaces between existence. But more precisely, Giratina represents the distortion, the irregularities, the darker reflections, the parts of reality that do not fit neatly into time or space. When the universe was born, a perfect order was not possible. There had to be a place for entropy, for chaos, for the edges where logic breaks down. Giratina became that place, and in that becoming, Giratina became its own realm. This was the transition. The conceptual void of the egg had given way to a structured physical reality. No longer was there only a single consciousness floating in nothing. Now there was time to measure change, space to hold matter, and something else, a necessary counterbalance, a wild card that ensured the system was not too rigid. The trio did not create the universe as a craftsman builds a house. They were the universe, arising from the will of Arceus like three notes from a single chord. Mount Coronet was the epicenter of that birth. In the physical world of the Sinjoh region, that mountain stands as the tallest peak, a spine of rock that runs through the heart of the land. But long before it was a mountain, it was the point of the shattering. The energy of that original explosion etched itself into the very geology of the planet, leaving a scar that would become a sacred landmark. The ancients of Hisui would later look upon that mountain and know that it was not just stone. It was the place where the fabric of reality had been torn and then stitched together by the hands of gods. Now, with the pillars in place, the universe began to expand. Stars ignited, planets coalesced. Life in its earliest forms started to emerge in the warm shallows of young seas. But the trio did not simply stand back and watch. They were woven into the very laws of physics. Every sunrise was a beat of Dialga's heart, every horizon was a curve of Palkia's body, and every anomaly, every strange glitch in the natural order, every place where the rules bent just a little too far, carried the echo of Giratina's presence. Yet the balance was fragile. Giratina's nature was too volatile to remain in the same reality as its siblings. Some say it was banished, others say it chose to retreat. But the distortion world was born from that separation, a parallel dimension where time flows sideways and space folds in on itself, where gravity is a suggestion and the laws of physics are merely loose guidelines. It is a prison but also a refuge, and it is the home of the shadow of the trio. As the eons passed, the memory of this birth faded into myth. The names of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina became sacred, whispered by the clans of Hisui, enshrined in the carvings of the Sinjoh ruins. But the truth remains. They are not just Pokémon. They are the raw living substances of existence itself. To encounter one is to brush against the fundamental fabric of everything. And of the three, perhaps the most intimate to our experience is Dialga, because without time there is no story. Without that steady pulse, we would have no past to remember, no future to anticipate, no present to drift through. The next chapter of this cosmic tale belongs to the being who first set the universe in motion, the one whose very name is the rhythm of existence. Dialga and the pulse of time. From the shattering of the singularity at Mount Coronet, three beings emerged, and the first of them was Dialga. But what does it mean for a creature to embody time itself? Not merely to control it, not to observe it, but to be the very pulse that drives it forward, the rhythmic heartbeat that dictates the flow of seconds and eons. This is the aspect of Dialga that we must examine. The idea that time is not a passive stage upon which events unfold, but a living, breathing force, and that force has a throne. When the original one summoned Dialga into existence, the universe was still nothing more than a potential, a single, frozen instant in which no change could occur. Without time, there is no before and after, no cause and effect, no growth or decay. The cosmos would have remained a static painting, beautiful but lifeless. Dialga's arrival was the first real action. Its presence introduced the arrow of time, and with it, the possibility of a story. But here we confront something deeply unsettling. If time is governed by a sentient entity, then time is not an infinite abstract dimension. It is a finite resource, one that can be directed, stretched, or perhaps even stopped. Consider the metaphysical weight of that. Every moment you experience, every second that ticks by in your memories, exists because Dialga permits that flow. The creature is not a caretaker of time, it is time, the rhythm of the universe. The steady, relentless march of instants is the same rhythm as Dialga's heartbeat. So why was this flow necessary? Why couldn't the universe simply remain the perfect still snapshot of its first moment? The answer lies in the nature of existence. A frozen snapshot is safe, yes. It is eternal in the sense that it never changes, but it is also dead. There is no growth, no complexity, no consciousness. In the primordial void, the original one created life not to be static but to become. Dialga's pulse is the engine of becoming. Without it, there would be no history, no future. No you listening to these words. Time is the medium in which everything else, space, matter, energy, can interact and evolve. Dialga is the metronome that keeps the cosmic symphony from collapsing into silence. We have all felt time, of course. We measure it, dread it, cherish it, but we rarely stop to think that it might have a will. Dialga's existence suggests that time is not merely a concept. It is a being with its own intentions, its own perception of past, present, and future. In the myths of Sinjoh, Dialga is said to live beyond the boundaries of linear time, seeing all moments at once. That means, from Dialga's perspective, your birth and death are simultaneous. The creature that governs your life is also experiencing it in its entirety. There is a strange comfort in that, perhaps. The idea that time itself is aware of your story, even if only as a single note in an endless melody. As we move deeper into this creation mystery, we will soon turn to the being who governs the stage upon which time unfolds. Dialga provides them, but another entity provides the space for that rhythm to echo. That story is for the next chapter, where we examine the expansion of the void into something that could hold every moment Dialga would ever create. For now, rest in the knowledge that every tick you hear is a living pulse, and that pulse has a name. If Dialga is the heartbeat of time, then Palkia is the breath that fills the empty canvas of reality. Where Dialga gives rhythm to existence, Palkia gives room. Without space, time is just a concept waiting in the wings, a pulse with nowhere to beat. And that is the essence of what we now explore, how the second of the creation trio took the raw, formless potential left by the first heartbeat and expanded it into the vast, structured universe we inhabit. Think of the moment after Dialga's first pulse. Time began, but it was a time of nothing but a singular, dimensionless point. All matter, all energy, all possibility compressed into an infinitesimal speck, a cosmic egg that had not yet cracked open into a cosmos. This is where Palkia steps in. Its breath is not air in any literal sense. It is the exhalation of spatial dimension itself. With every cosmic exhale, Palkia pushes the boundaries of that primordial point outward, creating the very fabric of extension. It is the source of length, width, depth, and all the space in between. Without Palkia, the universe would still be a silent, static singularity, a seed that never sprouts. The breath of Palkia is a continuous act. It is not a single event at the dawn of creation, but an ongoing process that sustains the structure of reality. Every moment you perceive distance between objects, every inch of empty sky, every vacuum between stars is a testament to Palkia's unending expansion. In the lore of Sinjoh, it is said that Palkia's breathing creates the very room for the universe to exist. That is not poetic exaggeration. It is a literal description of its function. Space is not a passive void. It is an active, maintained presence, held open by the will of a sentient being. If Palkia were to stop, if it were to hold its breath, the universe would begin to contract. All the distances we take for granted would shrink. Galaxies would collapse, and matter would rush back toward its original source, until everything once again became a single, dimensionless point. This leads to a profound connection between spatial stability and the physical boundaries of the Pokémon world. The landscapes we travel, the caves we explore, the oceans we cross, all of them exist only because Palkia maintains the shape and size of reality. The very concept of here versus there is a gift from this being. In the Pokémon world, space is not an abstract background. It is a living structure, one that can be warped, torn, or stitched together by its master. This is why Palkia is often associated with the power to create alternate dimensions, to fold space, to travel between locations in an instant. It can expand a single room into an endless labyrinth or compress a galaxy into a handful of steps. The boundaries are not fixed. They are negotiated every moment by Palkia's will. But this power also implies a terrible vulnerability. If Palkia's presence is what prevents the collapse of matter into a singular, dimensionless point, then its absence would be catastrophic. The universe would lose its scaffolding. Every particle would lose its sense of place and would be drawn inward by the memory of that original unity. This is why Palkia is not just a creator but a guardian. It holds the line against the natural tendency of matter to return to its simplest, most compressed form. It is the force that says, "Let there be room," and with that command it allows everything else to exist. Life, change, motion, all of it depends on having a place to unfold. We often think of space as empty, but in this cosmic framework, it is the most full thing there is. It is the architecture of all possibilities. Without space, no journey can begin, no relationship can form, no story can be told. Time gives us the sequence, but space gives us the stage. And Palkia is the master builder of that stage, forever expanding, forever sustaining the distances between things, so that they can interact without collapsing into one another. Yet, even as Palkia's breath fills the universe, there is a shadow that lingers at the edge of that expansion, a counterforce that does not seek to create room, but to reshape it into something else entirely. Something that was not banished out of malice, but out of necessity, because the balance of space and time requires a third element to keep the whole system from unraveling. That element is the Giratina Anomaly, and its story is one of exile, distortion, and the hidden cost of a stable cosmos, and so the stage was set. Palkia had stretched the fabric of space across an infinite canvas, and Dialga had set the primordial clock ticking. The universe was, in a sense, functional. But function is not the same as stability. For every light there is a shadow, and in the moment of creation, a third figure emerged alongside the architects of time and space. This was Giratina, and its presence was immediately unsettling. Not because it was violent, not yet, but because its very nature defied the neat categories that Dialga and Palkia had established. Time flows, space expands, but Giratina's domain was something else entirely, a kind of anti-reality, a substance that seemed to push back against the fabric of existence itself. In the earliest tellings of the myth, the purpose of the third member was not understood. Lore keepers would whisper that Giratina was simply the ruler of a dark world, a place of punishment or exile, but that interpretation missed the deeper truth. The original role of Giratina was not as a jailer or a villain, but as the embodiment of antimatter. If Dialga is the pulse of time and Palkia is the vessel of space, then Giratina is the counterpoint, the shadow cast by the light of creation. You cannot have a universe without also having its opposite, its mirror, its potential for dissolution. Every particle that came into being from the egg of the original one had an equal and opposite counterpart, and that counterpart did not simply vanish. It coalesced, it became Giratina. And this is where the inherent instability enters the story. The fledgling universe was not a calm, orderly place. It was a fragile bubble of reality, still cooling from the heat of its birth. Dialga and Palkia worked in harmony, but their work was constantly undercut by the presence of Giratina. Antimatter does not mix with matter, it annihilates it on contact. Wherever Giratina moved, reality frayed. Space-time would warp, tear, and then collapse into pockets of raw chaos. The world could not sustain both the order of the primary dimensions and the corrosive touch of this third being. In some accounts, the creation trio was meant to be a balanced trinity, but balance is a delicate thing when one of the pillars is actively consuming the material that the other two are building. The original one recognized that this arrangement was untenable. It did not destroy Giratina. Destruction would have been impossible, for antimatter is as eternal as matter in the cosmic ledger. Instead, it was banished. But banishment in this context was not like locking a creature in a cage. It was more like folding a piece of reality over on itself, sealing the anomaly into a separate pocket dimension where it could not touch the prime universe. This realm would later be called the Distortion world, but in those early days it was simply a void within a void. A place where the laws of geometry and chronology had no meaning, and there Giratina remained, not as a prisoner in chains, but as a necessary shadow kept at a necessary distance. Yet the exile was never perfect. The antimatter essence of Giratina still leached through the seams of reality, particularly at the site where the trio had first manifested, Mount Coronet. The same peak where Dialga and Palkia had been born became a fault line, a point where the barrier between worlds was thin. Over the eons, that instability would ripple outward, causing distortions that could be felt by those sensitive to cosmic forces. It is no coincidence that the ancient peoples of Sinnoh built their shrines and carved their myths around that mountain. They sensed that something was wrong beneath the surface, something that had been pushed away but not erased. And in the modern era, scientists who study the law often wonder, what if Giratina had not been separated? What if the trio had remained together, whole and unbroken? Would the universe have collapsed under the weight of pure antimatter? Or would a new kind of existence have emerged? A reality where time and space could bend and fold without penalty? We cannot know, because the story that the egg told itself demanded a fall, a rupture. The shadow had to be cast aside so that the light could shine. But shadows never truly leave. They linger in the corners of perception, waiting for the light to flicker. And the next chapter of this story is not about creation, but about conflict. The harmony between Dialga and Palkia was never perfect. They were two forces that could not fully coexist without a mediator. And in the absence of Giratina, the tension between time and space began to build. A war was inevitable. A war that would erupt across dimensions. One that would be remembered as the War of the Elements. But that is a tale for another telling. For now, the universe had its three pillars. One in the past, one in the present, and one hidden in the distortions of the void. And each one held a piece of the original mystery waiting to be understood. The previous chapter ended with Giratina, the shadow cast by the light of creation, the antimatter counterpart that balanced the emergence of time and space. But balance, in the earliest moments of the cosmos, was not a gentle equilibrium. It was a collision, a war fought without armies, without weapons, fought instead between the very fabric of existence itself. This is the story of that war, the War of the Elements. Ancient legends speak of a friction between time and space during the early formation of the cosmos. Not a mere disagreement or a temporary instability, but a fundamental incompatibility. Dialga and Palkia, each absolute in their respective domains, could not coexist without a buffer. Their realms, the flow of time and the shape of space, were designed to be separate layers, two sides of a single reality. Yet in the raw, unrefined dawn of existence, those layers overlapped. They pressed against one another, like tectonic plates, grinding in the dark. The consequences were catastrophic. Where time touched space without mediation, reality began to tear. Phenomena that cannot be described in human language occurred. Moments that stretched into infinite loops, while distances collapsed into singularities. Regions of the universe where a second lasted 1,000 years, and a pinprick of space contained an entire galaxy. This was not a slow degradation. It was an active unraveling. Dialga's temporal pulse, steady and relentless, clashed with Palkia's spatial breath, expansive and unyielding. And in the collision, the universe screamed. The root of the conflict lay in their equal status. Dialga and Palkia were not subordinate to one another. They were two halves of the same creative equation, each as powerful as the other. In myth, this parity is often framed as perfect balance, but in practice, perfect balance between two opposing forces leads to stalemate. Neither could overrule the other. When their domains overlapped, neither could retreat, because retreat would mean yielding absolute control over a portion of reality. And so they pushed, and reality buckled. This stalemate threatened to tear reality apart from the inside. Every overlapping region became a wound that could not heal. The friction generated echoes, strange resonances that rippled outward, disturbing the nascent order. Some old tales from Sinnoh speak of the first struggle, where the very concept of causality warped. Effects preceded causes. Objects appeared in multiple places simultaneously, and past and future bled into each other like wet ink on parchment. It was chaos, and chaos cannot sustain a universe. The legends say that Arceus, the original one, observed this conflict from a place beyond both time and space. But Arceus did not intervene directly. Instead, the solution came from within the trio itself, from the third member who had until then existed in a different kind of relation to creation. Giratina, the antimatter shadow, was not simply a passive opposite. It was the necessary counterforce, the buffer that could absorb and neutralize the friction between its siblings. But to serve that role, it had to be removed from the equation, separated from the normal universe. The War of the Elements did not end with a truce or a surrender. It ended with a banishment, and that banishment is the hinge upon which all of Sinnoh's creation myth turns. For without the exile of the third, the friction would have never stopped. The stalemate would have continued until time and space ground each other into nothing. That exile, and the realm to which the Banished King was sent, is the subject of our next chapter. The war between time and space was never a conflict of malice. Dialga and Palkia did not hate each other. They were simply two colossal forces operating in the same newborn universe without a buffer. When their domains overlapped, reality twisted, mountains folded into themselves, rivers flowed backward and sideways at once. Moments repeated forever in jagged loops. It was chaos. Not because either god was angry, but because the design was incomplete. And that is where the third member of the trio enters the story, not as a peacemaker, but as a mirror. Giratina had always been there, manifesting at the same moment as its siblings atop Mount Coronet. But its nature was different. Its domain was not time or space, but the substance that underlies both and threatens to undo them. Antimatter, the shadow cast by the light of creation, the opposite of everything that is, and the potential for everything that is not. In the earliest tellings of the Sinnoh myth, Giratina was not originally seen as violent. It was simply the part of reality that could not be controlled. Where Dialga brought order to the flow of moments, and Palkia brought structure to the expanse of distances, Giratina brought the principle of negation. For the universe to be stable, time and space needed to be held together. But antimatter, by its very nature, annihilates when it meets matter. So whenever Giratina drew close to the nascent world, the fabric of reality began to fray. The question then becomes, was this violence born of malice, or was it simply a byproduct of its destructive nature? All evidence points to the latter. Giratina did not seek to destroy. It was not angry at its siblings. It was not jealous of their roles. It simply existed, and its existence was incompatible with the reality that Dialga and Palkia were building. Every time it moved through the ordinary universe, it left behind rifts. Every time it breathed, pockets of space destabilized. The cosmos was not rejecting Giratina out of cruelty, but out of necessity. A universe built of matter cannot contain antimatter without erasing itself. And so Arceus intervened, not as a punisher, but as a cosmic architect forced to make a difficult decision. The creator had woven Dialga and Palkia into the fabric of reality itself. They were the pillars of existence and could not be removed without collapsing everything. But Giratina, the third child, was more like a wild root that cracked the foundation. It had to be separated from the main structure, not destroyed, but moved to a place where its nature would no longer threaten what its siblings held together. Thus was born the Distortion world. A cosmic prison, yes, but also a sanctuary. Arceus did not banish Giratina into a void of punishment. Instead, it created a pocket universe that ran on different rules. A realm where the laws of time and space do not apply in the way we understand them. Here, gravity is optional. Floors can become walls. Rivers flow upward. The geometry is fluid, dreamlike, and constantly shifting. It is a place designed to accommodate Giratina's antimatter nature, a cage where the bars are not made of stone or energy, but of the fundamental agreement that this reality simply does not touch our own. The separation was permanent. Once the Distortion world was sealed, Giratina could no longer walk the physical plane of what would become Sinnoh. The entrance to its realm was hidden, accessible only through a tier in the fabric of space near the peak of Mount Coronet. a scar left over from the ancient War of the Elements, and so the third member of the creation trio became the Forgotten One, the Banished King, the shadow that dwells in the negative spaces of the universe. But even in isolation, Giratina was not shut away from all connection. The Distortion world is not a tomb. It is a mirror of our own reality, connected by thin, invisible threads. Giratina can still perceive the world it left behind. It can feel the passage of time through the ripples that leak across the boundary. It can sense the distortions that occur when the barriers between dimensions grow thin, and sometimes, when the alignment of the universe is just right, it can reach out and touch the edges of our world again. That is why some legends speak of Giratina as a malevolent force, waiting for its chance to break free. But perhaps the more accurate interpretation is that it is simply lonely. Imagine being created as equal to your siblings, only to be told that you are too dangerous to exist alongside them. Imagine being placed in a realm where nothing is stable, where shapes have no meaning, and where the only company is your own reflection in 1,000 impossible mirrors. That is the existence of the Banished King, and yet there is a strange beauty to its prison. The Distortion world is not a hell. It is a place of raw, unfiltered creation, where Arceus's power is visible in its most chaotic form. It is a glimpse into what the universe might have been if time and space had never been imposed upon it. And for those few who have ever been pulled inside, the experience is said to be both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The permanent separation of the third member from the physical plane of Sinjoh was necessary, but it left a wound, a crack in the cosmos that can never fully heal, and that wound is what we will explore next. As we look closer at the strange architecture of the Distortion world, its shifting corridors, and the secrets it holds for those brave enough to enter its depths. The previous chapter ended with Giratina cast into a prison of its own making, a realm that was not so much built as it was unraveled from the fabric of reality itself. But what kind of prison is a place where time does not flow and space is not stable? To understand the Distortion world, we have to strip away every assumption we hold about how a universe should work. This is not a simple pocket dimension or a pocket of dark matter. It is a realm that exists as a necessary counterweight to the entire structure of our cosmos. When Arceus brought forth time and space, they created a framework of order. But order cannot exist without its opposite. The Distortion world is that opposite. A place where the fundamental laws we take for granted are not broken, but they are reversed, twisted, or simply absent. Think about time for a moment. In our world, it moves forward, second by second, carrying events from past to future. That is Dialga's domain. Now imagine a realm where time does not flow. There is no before and no after. There is no rhythm of seconds or eons. Everything exists in a perpetual present that never changes, yet is never still. It is not frozen. It is simply not moving along any line. Events do not happen. They simply are, all at once yet separate. And space. In our world, space has dimensions, length, width, height. You can move left, right, up, down, forward, backward. Palkia weaves these dimensions together so that objects have distance and position. In the Distortion world, space is not stable. Gravity shifts without warning. Floors become walls. Ceilings become chasms. Directions lose meaning because the geometry of the realm is not Euclidean. It is a landscape where up can become down simply by stepping in a certain direction, and where two points that seem far apart can be connected by a single step. This is the architecture of the Distortion world. It is a structural counterweight to the normal world. Think of a scale. On one side, you have time and space, ordered, predictable, stable. On the other side, you have the Distortion world, odorous, unpredictable, unstable. Without this counterweight, the scale would tip. The normal world would become unstable as well, its own laws beginning to fray at the edges. That is why Giratina must remain in exile, not as a punishment, but as a necessary balance. If Giratina were to leave the Distortion world, if it were to return to the world of time and space permanently, the two domains would clash directly. Dialga and Palkia's realms would begin to overlap without any buffer. The result would be catastrophic. A tearing of the fabric of existence, a dissolution of reality as we know it. The distortion world absorbs the chaos that would otherwise spill into our universe. It is a prison, yes, but it is also a shield. And yet the distortion world is not empty. It is a place of strange beauty. Crystal formations that float in defiance of gravity, pillars that stretch in infinite loops, and an eerie light that comes from no single source. Giratina itself is not merely a prisoner there, it is the heart of that place. Its antimatter nature resonates with the twisted laws, making it the only being that can navigate that realm without being torn apart. But even for Giratina, the exile is lonely. It is a king of a kingdom that no one can visit, a ruler of nothingness. All of this brings us to a moment when the barrier between worlds was almost broken. A moment when a group of people seeking power attempted to summon the creators themselves. That story is known as the Spear Pillar Incident. The distortion world, as we've seen, is a realm where time doesn't pass and space bends in ways that defy logic. A structural counterweight, a prison, but also a mirror. It exists because the universe needs a container for the opposing force that Giratina embodies. But to understand why that opposition was necessary, we have to return to the place where everything began. The jagged peak of Mount Coronet, rising through the center of Sinjoh like a seam in the fabric of reality. Mount Coronet is not just the tallest mountain in the region. It is the thin point between dimensions, the place where the veil between our world and the primordial chaos of creation is stretched thinnest. In ancient times, the first peoples of Sinjoh, the Celestic, the clans of Hisui, understood this. They didn't have our modern maps or geological surveys, but they felt the weight of the mountain in their bones. They knew that here, at this spire of rock and ice, the boundary between what is and what was, between here and the distant, formless before, was nearly porous. It was here, according to the oldest surviving texts, that Arceus first shaped the universe. The egg of creation hatched in a void that was not empty, but pregnant with potential. And from that egg, Arceus drew forth three beings, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. But the mountain itself bears the scars of that act. The stone of Mount Coronet, especially near the summit plateau called Spear Pillar, contains traces of a cosmic event so powerful that its energy signature has never fully faded. Even in the modern era, researchers with sensitive equipment can detect faint fluctuations in time and space near the peak, residual echoes of the birth of reality. Ancient civilizations did not have such instruments, but they had something else: faith, and a desperate need to understand the forces that shaped their world. They attempted to commune with the gods of time and space directly. At Spear Pillar, they built altars and stone circles, aligned with the stars and the mountain's own magnetic field. They performed rituals, offering chants and artifacts, hoping to draw the attention of Dialga or Palkia. Some records suggest they succeeded, that on certain nights, when the sky was clear and the air still, the boundary between dimensions grew so thin that a human voice could carry across the fabric of existence. The gods listened, or at least acknowledged, the presence of those below. But there was a cost. When mortal beings try to touch the infinite, they risk breaking the seal that keeps reality stable. The Celestic Chronicles speak of a priest king who, in his arrogance, attempted to command Palkia to reshape the world according to his will. The result was a rift in space that swallowed his entire court, leaving only a cold silence and a scar in the mountain that geologists still cannot fully explain. The energy signatures left behind at Spear Pillar are not just passive remnants. They are warnings, etched into the stone like invisible runes. For centuries, the site has remained a place of pilgrimage for those who seek the truth of creation. Yet even now, no one has fully unraveled the mystery of what happened there. The incident that gave Spear Pillar its name, some say it was a failed summoning, others a deliberate sacrifice. But one thing is certain: the mountain remembers, and the gods of time and space, though distant, have not forgotten the mortals who once dared to call them forth. That legacy of seeking, of reaching for something beyond the natural order, did not end with the fall of the Celestica. It was passed down through generations, whispered in legends, preserved in the architecture of ancient ruins. Those ruins, scattered across the regions, hold clues that connect the creation myth to later events. And nowhere is that connection more evident than in the next chapter of our story, where a hidden chamber beneath the mountains of Johto reveals a truth that ties every thread together. The Sinjoh Ruins Revelation. From the summit of Mount Coronet, ancient civilizations reached toward the heavens, hoping to catch the attention of beings that govern time and space. They built altars, offered artifacts, whispered prayers into the thin air where the boundary between worlds felt almost permeable. But those rituals were local, confined to the Sinnoh region, grounded in the belief that the creation trio were tied to that single mountain, that single landmass. What those civilizations did not know, what the passage of centuries would slowly reveal, is that the connection between these cosmic entities and the physical world runs far deeper than geography. It runs through bloodlines, through forgotten migrations, through a ruin hidden in the heart of Johto. The Sinjoh ruins stand as a testament to a truth that Sinnoh's ancient worshippers never fully grasped. Here, beneath the quiet hills of Johto, a structure exists that mirrors the very foundations of the universe. It is not a temple to Dialga or Palkia or Giratina alone. It is a stage, a platform designed not for worship, but for reenactment, for recreation. The mystery stage is the centerpiece of the Sinjoh ruins, and its existence changes everything we thought we understood about the relationship between the two regions. Consider the journey from Sinnoh across the sea to Johto. Why would a shrine dedicated to Arceus and its creations appear so far from Mount Coronet? The answer lies in the ancient peoples who once spread across the land, carrying their myths with them. The hidden connection between Sinnoh and Johto is not merely cultural or linguistic, it is structural. The same cosmic forces that shaped the Sinnoh region also shaped Johto, but in a different way. Where Sinnoh had the spear pillar as a point of contact, Johto received the Sinjoh ruins as a place of replication. The ritual of the mystery stage is not about summoning the creation trio. It is about demonstrating that Arceus can recreate them at will. Imagine the implications. If you stand at the center of that stage, holding a special item, a fragment of the original creation, the platform activates. Light arcs across the stone. The air thickens with presence. And then from that light, a new Dialga, a new Palkia, a new Giratina emerges. Not the originals, but their equals. Beings with the same power, the same cosmic weight, the same purpose. The ritual of the mystery stage proves that the creation trio are not unique individuals. They are functions, replaceable functions of the universe, generated by Arceus whenever the cosmic balance demands it. And that is the terrifying implication. For centuries, we thought of Dialga as the one and only master of time, Palkia as the sole weaver of space, Giratina as the singular outcast of the Distortion world. But the Sinjoh ruins reveal a cold mechanical truth. If Arceus can recreate them, then the original trio are not gods in the sense of irreplaceable beings. They are tools, instruments, parts of a machine that can be swapped out and rebuilt. The bond we feel with these legendary Pokémon, the reverence we hold for their ancient roles, all of it rests on the assumption that they are singular. The mystery stage shatters that assumption. How does this change our understanding of the Distortion world, of Giratina's exile? If Giratina can be replaced, then its banishment was not a punishment for an irreplaceable entity. It was a containment of a faulty function. Arceus did not imprison Giratina out of anger or vengeance. It quarantined a broken component of the universe. And if that component proves too unstable, Arceus can simply generate another Giratina, a new one that will obey the cosmic order without the violent tendencies of the original. The same applies to Dialga and Palkia. Their ancient conflict, the War of the Elements, may have been nothing more than a glitch in the original programming, corrected by later iterations. This revelation does not diminish the trio. If anything, it elevates them. They are not accidental creations. They are designed functions, each perfect for its role, yet each expendable if the universe requires an upgrade. And the Sinjoh ruins are the proof, the physical record of this capability, hidden away in Yoto, waiting for someone to follow the clues. The artifacts that summon these new creations are the keys. The Adamant Orb, the Lustrous Orb, the Griseous Orb. These are not just amplifiers of power, they are identification tokens, allowing the mystery stage to recognize which function to replicate. The fact that these orbs exist at all suggests that Arceus foresaw the need for replacement. It built a failsafe into creation itself. The ruins are that failsafe. So when you stand at the spear pillar and feel the weight of time and space pressing against reality, remember that the same forces are also encoded into the stones of Yoto. The connection between the two regions is not a coincidence of migration. It is a deliberate ancient design, and the orbs that channel the trio's essence hold secrets that go far beyond simple power boosts. They hold the blueprint of the universe. The next step is to trace their history, to understand what they truly are, and why their glow is not just light, but a signal that the functions of creation are always waiting to be called again. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. From the mysteries of the Sinjoh ruins, where the ancient stage allowed Arceus to manifest the trio anew, we now turn our attention to the very vessels that once held the essence of Dialga and Palkia, the Adamant and Lustrous Orbs. These are not mere artifacts crafted by human hands. They are crystallized fragments of the primordial forces that govern our time and space themselves, forged in the moment of creation, when Arceus first shaped the cosmos. In the old tales of Sinjoh, long before the first settlers climbed Mount Coronet, these orbs were said to have fallen from the heavens as the universe took its first breath. Or perhaps they were broken off from the fabric of reality itself, when Dialga and Palkia emerged from the void. To understand what these orbs truly are, we must look beyond their physical form. They are not simple gems or stones, they are anchors. Think of them as fixed points in a world that would otherwise be too fluid for divine beings to touch. Dialga and Palkia exist across all of time and all of space simultaneously. For them to interact with a single moment, a single place, they need a focal point. That is what the Adamant Orb provides for Dialga. A dense, unchanging node of temporal energy that allows the Lord of Time to press its influence into our linear reality without unraveling the whole continuum. The Lustrous Orb does the same for Palkia, a spatial knot that lets the ruler of dimensions fold itself into a location where mortals can perceive it. The origin of these artifacts is shrouded in the earliest records of the Hisui region. There the clans spoke of them as tears from the alpha Pokémon, shed when the universe was still wet and unformed. Others claimed they were born of the collision between Dialga's roar and Palkia's whisper, a sonic shockwave that solidified into crystal deep within Mount Coronet. What we know from later studies is that they are not created by mortal technology. They are discovered, unearthed, or summoned, and only at specific places where the boundary between our world and the realm of the creation trio is thin. The Spear Pillar, the Temple of Sinjoh, the hidden caves beneath the mountain. Each site holds the potential to house these orbs, because the bedrock itself has been saturated with primordial energy since the beginning. But here is the danger. Once mortal hands lay hold of these orbs, they are no longer just observers of time and space. They become gatekeepers. To touch the Adamant Orb is to feel the weight of every moment that has ever been and every moment yet to come. It is to experience the crushing gravity of infinity, squeezed into a single stone. To touch the Lustrous Orb is to see every possible arrangement of the universe at once, every dimension collapsing into one point of light. The human mind was never meant to hold such perception. Ancient texts from the Celestic ruins warn of those who attempted to wield the orbs in battle, not to command Dialga or Palkia directly, but to draw upon their power even for an instant. The results were catastrophic. Time would stutter around the wielder, freezing them in a loop of agony, or space would warp so violently that their own body would be stretched across miles, their consciousness scattered among fragments of reality. And yet the orbs were not always weapons. In the earliest civilizations, they were kept in reliquaries, never touched, only gazed upon during rituals of reverence. The Celestica people of ancient Hisui knew that the orbs were not tools for conquest but bridges. They would leave offerings near the orbs, hoping that Dialga and Palkia would sense the tribute and look favorably upon the land. The orbs vibrated with a low hum, audible only to those with pure intent, a sound that elders described as the heartbeat of the universe. That harmony was fragile. As soon as someone reached for the orb with ambition or greed, the hum turned to screaming silence, and the anchor became a weapon. How these crystalline catalysts act as anchors for the trio in the human world is a matter of physics as much as mysticism. Think of our reality as a river. Dialga and Palkia are the river itself, endless and ever-moving. To dip a hand into that river, you need something that does not dissolve in the current. The orbs are stones placed in the riverbed. They do not move, they do not erode. They become fixed points that the river must flow around. And that fixedness allows the gods to notice a single location, a single moment. Without the orbs, the trio would remain as abstract forces, unable to manifest in a form we could comprehend. The orbs give them shape, a vessel of crystal that resonates with their own essence, a physical echo of their infinite nature. But there is a cost. Every time the orbs are used to summon or channel Dialga or Palkia, they weaken the boundary between our world and the Distortion world. You see, the orbs are not only anchors for time and space, they are also plugs in a dam. Reality is held together by a delicate tension, and pulling on one thread loosens the others. This is why, in the legends, the orbs were often kept far apart, one in the peak of Mount Coronet, the other in a deep cavern, never brought together. For if they were united, the balance would tip, and the antimatter realm of Giratina would press against the seams. And that brings us to the third orb, or rather the core, the Griseous Core. It is the counterpart to the Adamant and Lustrous orbs, but its nature is far more volatile, because Giratina's domain is not time or space, but the inverse of both, the distortion that occurs when reality is broken. The Griseous Core is not an anchor in the same sense. It is a cage, or perhaps a key, and its story is one we will explore next, because the secrets it holds could undo everything the other orbs were meant to protect. But for now, let the glow of the Adamant and Lustrous orbs settle in your mind, these ancient stones that bind the gods to our fragile world. And remember that some powers are meant to be admired from a distance, never grasped. The Adamant and Lustrous orbs gave Dialga and Palkia a tangible anchor in our reality. But there was a third orb, one that history seemed to forget. While the civilizations at Spear Pillar carved their altars to time and space, another artifact lay hidden, buried not in temple stone, but in the very fabric of a forgotten dimension. This was the Griseous Orb, and its story is far stranger than a simple counterpart. The Griseous Orb is not a crystal of standard creation. It does not resonate with the flow of time or the curvature of space. Instead, it is a solidified fragment of the Distortion world itself, a sliver of that anti-reality compressed into a deep, smoky gem. Ancient texts describe it as the Griseous Core, a name that hints at its true nature. Where the Adamant Orb hums with the steady rhythm of seconds and millennia, the Griseous Orb pulses with a dissonant frequency, the echo of a place where cause and effect have no meaning. But the most remarkable feature of this orb is its ability to transform. When Giratina is exposed to the Griseous Orb outside its home realm, the artifact does not simply grant power, it physically alters the legendary Pokémon. This is the source of what we now call Origin Form. In the Distortion world, Giratina naturally exists in a state of flowing tendrils and shifting plates, a body unbound by the physics of our universe. Yet in our world, the same being appears as a bulky six-legged dragon. The Griseous Orb bridges that gap. It projects a field of distortion around Giratina, allowing it to temporarily assume its true form, even while standing on solid ground. The transformation is not cosmetic. With the orb, Giratina's attacks channel the raw entropy of its home dimension, bypassing the safeguards our reality normally imposes. But how did the orb come to be? The myths offer a chilling answer. After Giratina was banished, the distortion world sealed itself from our universe, but the barrier was not perfect. There were fractures, thin points, where the laws of our reality broke down. At these fractures, the distortion world bled into ours, leaving behind small pockets of antimatter. Over countless ages, these pockets crystallized, forming the first Griseous Orbs. They were rare, coveted, and dangerous. Holding one felt like grasping a piece of the void itself, a cold weight that whispered of forbidden knowledge, the hidden history of those who sought to bring the banished god back to our reality. Is a dark chapter in Sinjoh's past. Cults dedicated to Giratina did not worship it as a destroyer, but as a liberator. They believed that the distortion world held the key to escaping the strictures of time and space, that by merging our world with the anti-realm, all limitations could be erased. These followers were called the Renegade Cords, a name that echoed their leader's belief that Giratina had been unjustly exiled. They collected Griseous Orbs, studied their fruits, and performed rituals at the base of Mount Coronet, where the dimensional walls were thinnest. Their goal was to create a permanent tear, a wound in reality through which Giratina could return fully, without needing a vessel. The groups were eventually suppressed by the ancient Sinjoh clans, but their knowledge was not erased. It was hidden, scattered across ruins, and guarded by those who understood the consequences of such a breach. The Sinjoh ruins, which we explored earlier, hold hints of these rituals. The mystery stage, the same platform used to channel Arceus's power, was also used in ancient times to stabilize dimensional rifts. The connection between Johto and Sinjoh runs deeper than shared geography. It runs through the very lattice of creation, yet the Griseous Orb remains a mystery in its own right. It is not merely a tool, it is a piece of Giratina's home, a fragment of a world that does not obey our rules. When the Renegade Cords finally gave up their quest, they sealed the remaining orbs in hidden chambers, waiting for a time when the balance might shift again. That time may never come, but the orb endures, and as long as it exists, so too does the potential for Giratina to walk our world in its true form. But there is another perspective on this history, one that comes not from the ancient kingdoms of Sinjoh, but from the Hisui region. The Hisuian belief system, the way the people of that land viewed Giratina and its orb, offers a different truth. That is the story we will turn to next. The Griseous Core, then, was the key that allowed Giratina to hold its true form outside the distortion world. But what did the people of ancient Hisui actually believe about these beings? They had no Griseous Cores, no advanced understanding of antimatter or alternate dimensions. They looked up at the same Mount Coronet that we know today and saw something different on each side. The mountain was not just a mountain, it was the spine of creation, the place where the world was torn open and stitched back together. But how it was torn, and by whom, depended entirely on which side of the mountain you were born on. The Hisuian perspective on the Great Sinjoh was never unified. It was split, cleanly and permanently, into two distinct lenses. The Diamond Clan saw the world through the rhythm of time, the steady ticking of seasons, the aging of trees, the migration of Pokémon. They believed that the first being to shape the chaos into order was a master of time, a being who set the universe in motion like a clockwork mechanism. For them, that being was the true Sinjoh, the one who deserved worship. The Pearl Clan, on the other hand, saw the world through the expanse of space, the distances between stars, the boundaries of land and sea, the very shape of reality itself. They believed that the first act of creation was not a sequence of moments, but a stretching of dimensions, a folding of emptiness into form. Their Sinjoh was the master of space. This was not a simple difference of opinion. It was a conflict that defined the entire culture of Hisui. The Diamond and Pearl clans were not just separate tribes. They were opposing philosophies, each convinced that their god was the true creator. They built their rituals around different artifacts, offered prayers to different cosmic forces, and passed down tales that directly contradicted the other. When a child of the Diamond clan looked at the sky, they saw the past and future colliding in the present moment. When a child of the Pearl clan looked at the same sky, they saw the vast emptiness waiting to be filled, and both believed with absolute certainty that their lens was the only correct one. But here is where the myth becomes even stranger. There was a third being, a third god, that both clans had heard whispers of, but neither claimed it as their own. Giratina existed on the edges of Hisuian memory, mentioned only in fragmented texts and fearful warnings. The historical erasure of Giratina from the primary myths of the region was not an accident, it was deliberate. The Diamond clan had no place for a being of distortion, because time was linear and orderly. The Pearl clan had no place for a being of antimatter, because space was defined by boundaries. Giratina represented the chaos that neither clan could reconcile with their vision of a perfect, rational creation. So it was banished, not only from the physical world, but from the sacred stories themselves. The only traces that remained were fables of a violent entity that had been cast out by Sinjoh for its unruly nature. Tales that grew quieter with each generation, until the third member of the trio was all but forgotten. Yet even in its erasure, Giratina left a mark. The clans could not ignore the unnatural places in the world. The caves that seemed to breathe, the lakes where water flowed upward, the patches of air that tasted like static. They knew something was there. Something that did not fit into the orderly creation they prayed to. But naming it would have meant admitting that their understanding of the great Sinjoh was incomplete. So they let the whispers fade, and they let the distortion world remain a shadow on the edge of belief. And when the Griseous Core was rediscovered, and when Giratina's true form was seen again after centuries of obscurity, the old conflict between the clans seemed almost petty, because the truth was not that one god was more real than the other, or that Giratina was an afterthought. The truth lay in the forms themselves, the origin forms that Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina could take. Forms that revealed a hidden geometry behind reality. How those forms came to be, and what they mean for the balance of the universe, is a mystery that takes us far beyond the mountains of Hisui. The Diamond and Pearl clans of Hisui each believed their chosen deity, Dialga or Palkia, was the true creator of all things, but both were right, and both were wrong. For what they glimpsed from the peak of Mount Coronet were not the true visages of time and space. Those were mere avatars, forms tempered for a world of matter and motion. The real appearances of Dialga and Palkia, the shapes they take when closest to Arceus' influence, are something far more ancient, far more terrifying. We know them as the origin forms, and their unveiling changes everything we thought we understood about the boundaries between Pokémon and cosmic function. When Dialga and Palkia are brought near the very source of creation, whether through the power of the Adamant or Lustrous Orb, combined with a direct conduit to Arceus, or perhaps through the mystery stage of the Sinjoh ruins, their bodies undergo a radical transformation. The familiar blue and pink draconic forms dissolve, replaced by something that seems less organic and more architectural. Dialga's origin form becomes a shimmering entity of crystal and metal, its limbs elongated into flowing, almost liquid streamers of time-infused matter. Its head develops a crest that resembles the hoops and rings of Arceus' own neckpiece, and a glowing crystalline core pulses at its chest. Palkia, likewise, sheds its softer contours for a form that appears woven from threads of pure spatial dimension, each arm and leg ending in sharp, pointed crescents. its wings transformed into shimmering, translucent sails that seem to fold reality around them. These are not mere alternative skins. They are the raw, unfiltered embodiments of their domains, no longer toned down for the sanity of mortal eyes. To witness an origin form is to see time flowing as a visible current, or space bending into tangible ribbon. It is a sight that strains the mind, because the mind evolved in a world where time and space are unconscious constants. To perceive them as active agents is to feel the very bedrock of your reality become uncertain. And here is the deepest mystery. Look closely at these origin forms, and you will see anatomical similarities to the alpha Pokémon itself. The ring-like structures that hover around their bodies mirror Arceus's own form. The crystalline, almost digital patterning on their skin echoes the way Arceus's body appears to pulse with transcendent light. In the Generation 4 games, the sprites of Dialga and Palkia's origin forms share design motifs with Arceus's own sprite. The same kind of floating appendages, the same sense of gravitational displacement. It is as if, when they ascend to this higher state, they become pieces of a larger cosmic puzzle, fragments of a single divine geometry. This is what bridges the gap between Pokémon and cosmic function. In their standard forms, they are creatures we can catch, train, and battle. They have types, stats, moves. They are characters in a story. But in their origin forms, they become something more akin to principles. They are no longer just Dialga, the temporal Pokémon. They are the rhythm of cause and effect made visible. They are not just Palkia, the spatial Pokémon. They are the curvature of space-time given vessel. And when they stand alongside Arceus, the three forms almost seem to fit together, as if the universe itself is a machine of three interlocking gears. And yet, there is a fourth gear, Giratina. Its origin form, maintained by the Griseous Core, also shares these anatomical echoes. The floating bands, the ethereal wings, the sense of being more idea than body. But Giratina's origin form is more jagged, more spiked, more unstable. And that instability is no accident. The Distortion world was not just a prison, it was a necessary quarantine. Because when a cosmic function takes its true form, it must be controlled. Without Arceus's oversight, the origin forms could unravel the fabric of reality simply by existing too close to the material plane. The ancient Hisuians never saw these forms. They only saw the avatars, the manageable faces of divinity. But there were rituals, whispered, forbidden, that spoke of the red chain, a binding force, a remnant of the original moment of creation that could command even an origin form. That chain, if ever forged again, could change the balance of everything. Because if someone could harness the raw, unfiltered power of time and space in their truest state, they would not just wield a Pokémon, they would hold the reins of reality itself. And that prophecy is closer to fulfillment than anyone suspects. The red chain awaits its moment. But that is a story for our next chapter. We saw them in their origin forms, those terrifying glimpses of Dialga and Palkia when they are pulled closer to the source of all creation. Their bodies become more crystalline, more raw, more like the very laws they govern made flesh. But even in that state, they remain bound by something older than any mortal could understand. And yet, there was one who believed he could bind them, a man named Cyrus, who looked upon the gods of time and space not with reverence, but with the cold eyes of a scientist dissecting a lesser creature. He wanted to rewrite the universe itself, and he found the key in a prophecy older than Sinjoh itself, the red chain. The alchemy behind the red chain is not a matter of melting ore or forging metal. It is a ritual of pure essence. The chain is created from the combined power of the three late guardians, Uxie, the being of knowledge, Mesprit, the being of emotion, and Azelf, the being of willpower. These three are not merely powerful Pokémon, they are the fundamental pillars of spirit. Without knowledge, the mind cannot conceive of time. Without emotion, the heart cannot feel the depth of space. Without will, the soul cannot exist in the face of antimatter. And so, when their essences are woven together through an ancient alchemical process, the resulting chain is not a physical object. It is a metaphysical tether, a leash that can reach into the fabric of reality and seize the very incarnation of that reality. The existential threat posed by a mortal attempting to rewrite the laws of the universe is absolute. Cyrus was not a conqueror in the traditional sense. He did not seek land or treasure. He sought to erase the spirit from existence entirely. In his view, the universe was flawed because it contained emotion, will, and knowledge that led to suffering. He believed that by controlling Dialga and Palkia with the red chain, he could undo creation itself, collapsing time and space into a blank slate, a new world without heart, without conflict, without anything that makes life meaningful. This is the danger of a mortal who understands just enough of the cosmic order to corrupt it. He was not a madman. He was a systematic, logical monster who believed he could improve on the work of Arceus. But why could the creation trio not resist the power of the Lake Guardians? Why would the beings of time and space, who are older than any lake, any thought, any feeling, be bound by a chain forged from spirits that seem far lesser? The answer lies in the nature of their own existence. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina are not just powerful, they are concepts made sentient. But a concept needs to be perceived, to be known, to be felt, to be willed into existence. Without the Lake Guardians, there would be no mind to observe time, no heart to experience space, no will to resist the distortion world. The trio's power is absolute, but their identity is intrinsically tied to the consciousness that defines them. The red chain taps into that connection. It does not overpower the creation trio with brute force. It coerces them by pulling the very ground of their being out from under them. Uxie knows what time is. Mesprit feels the flow of space. Azelf wills the boundary between realities. And when those three essences are interwoven into a chain, they speak the language of the trio's own origin. The gods cannot refuse, because the chain does not attack them. It reminds them of what they are. This is why the prophecy is so terrifying. It does not rely on violence. It relies on the deep structure of reality. And when a mortal holds the chain, he holds a piece of the mind, heart, and will of the universe itself. But even that power has its limits. A chain can only bind what is already bound, and there is always a shadow, a third observer that exists outside the system, watching from the distortion world, waiting for the moment when the balance tips too far in one direction. That is the next piece of the puzzle, the Antimatter Equilibrium, because when you pull time and space too tightly together, something has to give, and that something is the nature of reality itself. The red chain, forged from the tears of the Lake Guardians, was a terrifying tool. It could bind the wills of Dialga and Palkia, forcing them to obey a mortal's command. But what about the third brother, the one who was not summoned by that crimson chain, the one who dwells in a realm that is not our own? The alchemists who created the red chain understood that to control time and space was to rewrite the universe. Yet they left out the balance. They forgot the shadow. They forgot Giratina. To understand Giratina's true role, we must move beyond ancient myths and into the cold, precise language of physics. The scientific interpretation of the creation trio is not a metaphor. It is a description of reality at its most fundamental level. Dialga is time, the direction of cause and effect. Palkia is space, the arena where events unfold. And Giratina is antimatter. Not evil, not a demon, but the necessary counterbalance to existence itself. In the earliest moments of the universe, matter and antimatter were created in equal amounts. They annihilated each other, leaving behind a tiny surplus of matter. That surplus became everything we know. But the antimatter did not disappear. It was separated, isolated, stored in a pocket dimension that mirrors our own. A place where the laws of physics are reversed and inverted. That is the distortion world, and Giratina is its sole guardian. Think of antimatter as the negative image of matter. A particle and its antiparticle are identical in mass, but opposite in charge. When they meet, they vanish in a flash of pure energy. For our universe to survive, that meeting cannot happen. The distortion world is the containment vessel. Giratina is the warden. But what happens when the warden is wounded? when the distortion world itself is damaged. We have seen this in the myths. In the ancient battles between Dialga and Palkia, the fabric of reality trembled. But if Giratina's realm is destabilized, the damage is more subtle yet more profound. Rifts form, antimatter leaks into our world, objects begin to behave strangely, time loops, space bends. But the most terrifying consequence is the slow erasure of matter itself. A city could slowly dissolve, atom by atom, into nothingness as antimatter particles touch their opposites. Giratina does not cause this out of malice. It is a reaction to imbalance. The distortion world is not a prison for Giratina. It is a dam holding back a flood that would drown all of reality. This brings us to the relationship between the three brothers. They are not enemies, they are not friends, they are something deeper, a symbiotic triad that transcends animosity. Dialga and Palkia clash because their domains are fundamentally opposed. Time is linear, space is infinite. One cannot exist without the other, yet they grind against each other like tectonic plates. Giratina is the fault line. It is the pressure that keeps them in check. When Dialga and Palkia fight, Giratina does not intervene to punish them. It intervenes to stabilize the equilibrium. The distortion world is the buffer zone. Without Giratina, the constant friction between time and space would create tears in reality that could never heal. The three are not a hierarchy, they are a cycle. Dialga creates the moment, Palkia gives it a place, and Giratina ensures that moment does not collapse into its own shadow. They depend on each other, even as they despise each other's existence. The ancients of Hisui understood this better than we do. They saw the three as a single cosmic function with three faces. The Diamond clan revered Dialga, the Pearl clan revered Palkia, and the forgotten third perspective revered Giratina. Those who understood the antimatter equilibrium saw not a banished monster, but a necessary counterpart. The Griseous Core, later transformed into the Griseous Soul, was not a cage, it was a key. It allowed Giratina to anchor itself to our world when the distortion world needed repair, or when the balance demanded its presence. The core is a piece of the boundary between matter and antimatter. Without it, Giratina cannot safely exist outside its realm, and without Giratina, the boundary weakens. So when we speak of Giratina as the protector of the world's reverse, we must redefine what protection means. It is not a guardian that fights for us. It is a guardian that fights against the very collapse of existence. The distortion world is not a hellish alternative. It is the shadow that gives form to the light. And if that shadow is damaged, the light does not become brighter, it becomes blinding, it becomes nothing. And yet, there are those who have tried to manipulate this balance. There are temporal anomalies, events where time skips like a scratched record, where past and future bleed together. Some say these are the scars left by ancient struggles between the creation trio. Others whisper of a power that can move through time, not with the permission of Dialga, but by exploiting a wound in the fabric of the universe. That is a story for another night. That is the mystery of temporal anomalies and time travel, a mystery that has haunted the Sinjoh region since the first moment the distortion world trembled, and we will explore it soon. For now, rest. The equilibrium holds, the shadow stays in its place, and the three brothers continue their eternal dance, each step keeping reality from falling into the void between moments. The previous chapter explored the fragile equilibrium between our world and the distortion world, and what happens when that boundary is breached. We saw how Giratina's realm acts as a kind of cosmic counterbalance, a necessary darkness that keeps the physical universe from tearing itself apart. But that equilibrium depends on something even more fundamental, the steady, unbroken flow of time itself, and that flow is entrusted to one being alone. Dialga does not merely control time, it is time. Every tick of a clock, every sunrise and sunset, every heartbeat that marks the passage from birth to death. These are not events that happen within time. They are events that happen because Dialga allows them to. The creature is the structure that holds the past, present and future in their proper places. Without Dialga, time would not simply stop. It would collapse into a single, impossible moment where all events occur at once. There are documented instances across the Pokémon world where Dialga's influence has been disturbed, and the results are terrifying. When its power is weakened, when its crystal, the Adamant Orb, is damaged, or when a mortal dares to challenge its authority, rifts appear in the timeline. Small fractures at first, a day repeating itself. A person meeting a version of themselves from 20 years ago, a forest that grows old and young again every few hours. These are the symptoms of a temporal wound that refuses to heal. The most famous example comes from the ancient texts of the Sinjoh region, recorded by the Diamond clan. They speak of a time when Dialga grew enraged. Some say by the theft of a sacred artifact, and the sky itself became a tapestry of overlapping eras. Villagers saw the sun rise and set in the span of a single breath. Children born in the morning were elderly by dusk. Crops that had not yet been planted were already harvested, and then rotted, and then sprouted again. It was not time speeding up, it was time losing its shape. In that world, the past, present, and future occur simultaneously. There is no before or after. There is only now, and every now is crowded with every moment that has ever been or will ever be. Imagine trying to walk forward when every direction is every direction. You cannot take a step without colliding with the memory of a step you haven't taken yet. People in that state go mad because the mind cannot process a universe where cause and effect no longer apply. A wound does not heal. It is always healing and always freshly opened. A thought does not finish. It echoes into infinite versions of itself, each one slightly different. This is the danger that Dialga prevents by maintaining the linear nature of human perception. We experience time as a line because Dialga enforces that order. It is not that time is naturally linear. The cosmos, left to its own devices, would be a chaotic soup of moments. But Dialga acts as a filter, a guide, a gatekeeper. It allows us to perceive one moment after another in sequence so that we can learn, grow, and remember. Without that gift, we would be frozen in an eternal, undifferentiated present. And yet even Dialga is not invulnerable. There are forces that can wound time itself. The red chain, for example, was designed to bind Dialga and Palkia together, subjugating their will to a mortal hand. When that chain is used, the temporal rifts become permanent. The sky cracks. Events from different eras bleed into one another. A hero from the past may appear in the present, not as a ghost, but as a living person caught in a current they cannot escape. These fractures are not limited to the Sinjoh region. Recent reports from the Alola region describe strange pockets where time behaves differently. Researchers there call them ultra ruins, though the name feels inadequate. In those places, the sun never seems to move, and shadows remain fixed in place for days. Pokémon that wander into such zones sometimes emerge older or younger, their instincts scrambled. The locals whisper that Dialga's influence is fading in that part of the world, and they pray for its return. But perhaps the most unsettling documentation comes from the Hisui era, from the writings of a Ginkgo guild merchant who claimed to have witnessed a completely reversed timeline. He wrote of a village where the river flowed upstream, where fire turned wood into ash, and then turned ash back into wood, over and over. He could not leave, because every path he took led him back to the same moment. He eventually starved, trapped in a loop of his own forgotten decisions. His journal was found years later, the final page half-eaten by time itself. These are the stories that remind us why Dialga is not simply a powerful Pokémon. It is the warden of our reality, and when it falters, so does everything we know as order. This understanding of temporal rifts naturally leads us to their spatial counterparts. Because time and space are not separate in the way we often assume, they are two sides of the same fabric. And when that fabric tears, the resulting fractures are not just temporal, they are interdimensional. In the next chapter, we will explore those spatial fractures and what happens when the boundary between worlds becomes thin enough to walk through. Time and space are not separate entities, but two sides of the same coin. If Dialga governs the flow of moments, then Palkia is the architect of the stage upon which those moments unfold. The previous chapter showed us the dangers of a fractured timeline, a world where past, present and future collide. But what happens when the very fabric of space begins to tear? What happens when the universe's scaffolding wavers and the boundaries that keep one dimension distinct from another become porous, fragile, or even non-existent? Palkia's ability is not merely to create or shape space, it is to fold space. Imagine a sheet of paper stretching infinitely flat. Now imagine creasing that paper, bringing two distant points together until they touch. That is the essence of Palkia's power. It can crumple the distances between stars, compress entire galaxies into a single breath, or create pockets of reality that sit just out of phase with our own. Within these folds lie what we call subdimensions. They are not separate worlds like the Distortion world. They are more like pleats in the same garment of reality. A room that is larger on the inside than the outside. A hallway that loops back on itself forever. A forest where the trees grow downward into an invisible sky. These are not anomalies. They are expressions of Palkia's mastery, and they exist all around us, hidden in the seams of the world. But the existence of these subdimensions raises a troubling question. The ultra wormholes, vivid, shimmering portals that tear through the air and connect our world to the ultra beast's home plane. Do they fall under Palkia's domain? At first glance, a wormhole is a spatial phenomenon, a shortcut through the fabric of the cosmos. Surely such a breach would be within Palkia's jurisdiction. Yet the ultra wormholes behave strangely. They do not seem to obey the same rules as Palkia's folds. They are chaotic, unstable, and they do not appear to be creations of any known legendary. They are more like wounds than deliberate structures. Some researchers speculate that the ultra wormholes are not a product of Palkia's will, but a side effect of something else. Perhaps a reaction from the universe when Palkia's influence is too weak or too strong in a certain region. Others argue that the ultra beasts themselves come from a dimension so far beyond Palkia's reach that even the Lord of Space cannot claim sovereignty over the paths they use. This mystery remains unsolved. Is Palkia the gatekeeper of all spatial passage, or are there doorways even it cannot open or close? The physical world offers clues. In regions where Palkia is particularly active, or where its power has been tampered with, space begins to glitch, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal visible way. People have reported seeing duplicate shadows that move independently of their source, landmarks that shift their positions when no one is looking, gravestones that appear in two places at once. The most unsettling manifestations are the spatial echoes. Moments when a person sees themselves walking down a street they have never visited, or hears a conversation that will take place tomorrow. These are not time slips. They are spatial fractures. Moments when the fabric of location becomes so thin that nearby points overlap. It is as if the world is buffering, struggling to render itself correctly. And when these glitches become severe, entire buildings or forest clearings can be displaced, relocated miles away in an instant. The only consistent pattern is that these events happen near sites of high geological or legendary energy, often linked to Mount Coronet or the lakes of Sinjoh. Something about those places makes space vulnerable. The most terrifying possibility is that these glitches are not accidents. They could be warnings. Palkia, like Dialga, is not a benevolent deity by human standards. It is a force of nature. When that force is disturbed, by the misuse of the Red Jane, by the meddling of humans, or by the approach of a greater power, space reacts. The tears may be the first signs of a larger collapse. And if Palkia ever loses control, or if something forces it to retreat, the entire structure of the universe could unravel. There is a reason why the ancient texts speak of Palkia in tones of awe and fear. To fold space is to hold the cosmos together. To unfold it is to let everything scatter into nothing. But there is another presence in these fractures, a shadow that lingers at the edges of spatial instability, watching, waiting. It is not Palkia, and it is not Giratina, but it is something that knows how to slip through the cracks. In the next chapter, we will confront that presence directly. We will explore the legend of the Renegade, and what happens when a Pokémon chooses to walk away from its cosmic duty. That story is known only in whispers, but those whispers contain the key to understanding why space itself can be so fragile. The shadow of the Renegade is not a ghost story. It is a warning from the deepest archives of Sinnoh's history, and its truth will change everything you thought you knew about the creation trio. So, where does that leave the realm that was never meant to exist? Palkia governs the spaces we know, the dimensions we can touch and walk through. But what about the space that is a mirror turned inward? A reflection that does not obey the laws of expansion and contraction. The Distortion world is not a fracture of Palkia's domain. It is something else entirely. A place where space does not know how to behave, because it was never given the proper instructions. And inhabiting that realm, watching the world of light and form from beyond its boundaries, is Giratina, the renegade Pokémon, the shadow at the edge of creation. You might have heard the stories passed down through Sinnoh's old villages, whispered around fires when the moon was dark, that if you stare into a still body of water at midnight, you might catch a glimpse of a second moon, a pale, inverted one staring back, that if you glance at a mirror in a room that has been empty for too long, you might feel a presence standing just behind your shoulder, where no reflection should be. These are not just ghost stories. They are the folklore of a region that has always known, deep in its collective memory, that Giratina is watching. It has become the silent observer of the human world, not through prying eyes, but through every surface that can hold an image, every shadow that stretches across a wall, every moment when the light bends just wrong enough to reveal a threshold between worlds. The psychological impact of this belief on the people of Sinnoh cannot be overstated. The renegade Pokémon is not worshipped like Dialga or Palkia. There are no temples built in its honor, no festivals celebrating its power. Instead is the one you speak of in hushed tones, the one children are warned not to summon. And yet, for all that fear, there is a strange comfort in the idea that something is watching, because if Giratina can see you, it can also see the rifts that threaten your existence. It can see when a tear in space grows too wide, when a distortion in time begins to unravel the fabric of the world. And when that happens, it does not need to be called. It is already there. This brings us to the most unsettling question of all. Is Giratina truly evil? The Pokédex entries that speak of its banishment for its violence seem to condemn it as a creature of pure destruction. But violence against what? Consider the Distortion world as a kind of prison, or perhaps a quarantine zone. If you are the guardian of a boundary, your role is to repel anything that tries to cross it, including something that might not be malicious, but simply incompatible. Giratina's violence, if we can call it that, is the violence of a wall holding back the ocean. It does not hate the water. It simply does not let it through. And when the wall holds, the world inside remains safe. In the ancient texts of Hisui, there are fragments that describe Giratina not as a renegade, but as a warden. After Arceus shaped the universe, it needed a being to ensure that the newly created reality would not collapse into its own negative space. Dialga and Palkia built the structure. Giratina became the boundary. And when that boundary is breached, it does not attack because it enjoys the conflict. It attacks because it is the only thing standing between order and total dissolution. You could say that the Distortion world is not a punishment. It is a duty post. And Giratina has stood there, watching through every mirror and shadow for billions of years. So when you listen to the folk tales of Sinnoh, pay attention not to the fear in the voices, but to the underlying truth they are trying to express. The renegade Pokémon is not a monster. It is the silence in the room when you are alone. It is the reflection that does not blink. It is the feeling of being seen when you are sure no one is there. And that feeling is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to remind you that the universe has edges, and those edges are guarded by something that never sleeps, never looks away, and never forgets its purpose. And now, as we prepare to turn our gaze toward the one who gave that purpose, the original source who created the prison and the prisoner as like, we must ask what it means for a creator to make a being of pure boundary. What does Arceus see when it looks into the Distortion world? Does it see a fallen servant? Or does it see a guardian who chose to stand at the precipice, knowing that to be the shadow is to be forgotten even by the light that cast you? That story, the one that connects the hand that shaped the cosmos to the hands that hold it together, is a mystery we have only just begun to unravel. In the next chapter, we will follow that thread back to its source, and we will learn what it means for Arceus to have a favourite child. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. We ended the last chapter in the shadow of the Renegade, watching Giratina peer through mirrors and reflections, a silent guardian of a world that banished it. But if Giratina is the outcast, what does it mean that it still answers to something higher, that all three of them do? The red chain was a mortal's attempt to bind gods, but there is only one being that truly commands them, and it does so with something as simple as a sound. The azure flute is no ordinary instrument. It is a relic of a time before time, a sonic key woven into the fabric of creation. When its melody echoes through the halls of the Spear Pillar, something deep inside Dialga, Palkia and Giratina recognizes it. They do not resist. They cannot resist. The hierarchy of the cosmos is absolute. Arceus sits at the apex, not as a king among equals, but as the source from which all things flow. The trio are not independent agents. They are the thousand arms of Arceus, extensions of a single will that chose to divide itself into three fundamental forces. Think about that phrase for a moment. The thousand arms. In ancient Sinnoh art, Arceus is often depicted with a ring of smaller appendages reaching out into the void. Each arm is a function of reality. Dialga is the arm that holds the thread of time, keeping it from tangling into a knot that would collapse every timeline at once. Palkia is the arm that stretches the canvas of space, ensuring there is a stage for matter to exist upon. And Giratina, it is the arm that pushes back against the excess, the antimatter that would otherwise annihilate the positive universe. They are not three separate gods. They are three aspects of one creation, forced into separate forms so that the cosmos could have structure. This is why the azure flute works. It does not issue a command like a master to a servant. It resonates with the original harmonic signature of Arceus. The trio hear that frequency, and they remember their origin. They remember that they are not meant to act as independent wills. They are the fingers of a hand that has not moved since the first moment. When the flute plays, they snap back into alignment like a compass needle finding true north. There is no negotiation. There is no defiance. There is only the echo of creation. But if they are all extensions of the same will, why did Giratina get exiled? Why does the Distortion world exist at all? The answer lies in the cosmic fail-safes put in place to prevent the trio from destroying one another. Arceus foresaw a problem. Time and space are not opposites. They are complementary. They need each other. But antimatter is a different kind of force. It does not complement, it opposes. If Giratina had remained in the same dimensional axis as Dialga and Palkia, the friction would have been unbearable. The three forces would have clashed constantly, tearing reality apart in a war of fundamental laws. So Arceus separated them. It built a boundary between the normal universe and the Distortion world, a membrane that allows Giratina to influence our reality without being able to directly collide with it. The Distortion world is not a prison. It is a buffer zone, a fail-safe designed to preserve the integrity of time and space by giving antimatter its own domain. Think of it like a circuit breaker. When the energy of reality becomes too unbalanced, Giratina can vent that pressure through its own dimension, absorbing the chaos that would otherwise shatter the fragile order of Dialga and Palkia. This also explains why the trio's base stat totals are identical. They are mirrors of each other, 3 equal facets of a single gem. Their power is the same. Their roles are what differ. Dialga does not overpower Palkia, nor does Palkia dominate Giratina. They are locked in a perfect equilibrium, each one's existence preventing the other two from becoming absolute. Without Palkia, Dialga's time would have no container to flow through. Without Dialga, Palkia's space would be frozen, eternal yet dead. And without Giratina, the universe would suffer from an excess of positive matter, an inflation of reality that would eventually burn everything out. Arceus built that balance with precision. It gave each member of the trio a specific vulnerability that ensures they cannot exceed their mandate. Dialga cannot exist without the flow of causality. If time stops, it ceases to be. Palkia needs boundaries. If space becomes infinite without shape, it dissolves. Giratina needs a point of opposition. If antimatter ever fully consumed the normal world, it would have nothing to push against and would collapse into a silent void. These are the cosmic fail-safes, invisible chains that keep the gods in check, and at the center of it all stands Arceus, holding the ultimate authority. It does not need to watch them constantly. It built the system to be self-regulating, but we must consider what that means for the mortal world. If the creation trio are merely extensions of Arceus's will, then every event that involves time, space, or antimatter is part of a larger design. The red chain nearly broke that design. But even it could not sever the trio's connection to their creator. The chain could bind their actions, but it could not change their allegiance. This brings us to the most overlooked piece of evidence in the entire myth, the Celestic town murals. They are not just art, they are a manual, a faded record of how the hierarchy works and why the Azure Flute exists. And if you look closely at those ancient paintings, you might see something that changes the way you understand the entire creation story. Something about the position of the trio relative to Arceus. Something that suggests the 1,000 arms are not just arms. But we will save that thread for the next chapter, because the murals are a labyrinth of secrets, and we have only just begun to map them. The previous chapter explored the hierarchy of the cosmos, how the trio answers to the Azure Flute, and the idea that they are extensions of Arceus's will. That understanding came largely from temple inscriptions and written records passed down by ancient Hisuian peoples. But there is another source, one that predates those writings by millennia. It is carved into stone, hidden in a cave beneath a quiet Sinjoh town, and it tells a story that refuses to stay still. Deep in the hollows under Celestic town, the walls hold images that have survived countless winters. We call them the Celestic town murals. They are not grand frescoes or painted ceilings. They are etchings, lines chiseled into bedrock, darkened by centuries of torch smoke, and what they show is unmistakable. 3 figures arranged around a central light. The figures are not human. Their forms are angular, almost mechanical, but unmistakably alive. The largest of the 3 stands at the top, wings spread, a crest like a crown. To its left, a creature with a serpentine body and a jewel at its chest. To its right, a being of sharp edges and swirling tails. And in the center, a blazing circle, a point of radiance from which lines radiate outward, connecting to each figure as if they are held by invisible threads. For generations, this single image has been the subject of intense study. The obvious interpretation is that the 3 figures are Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, and the central light is Arceus. The alignment matches the creation myth. Arceus births the trio, and the world begins. But the mural does not show a birth, it shows a gathering. The 3 are not subordinate to the light. They surround it, each facing inward, as if they are part of a mechanism. The light does not sit above them. It is enclosed, encircled, held in place by their presence. This subtle shift in composition has led to a radical rethinking of the myth, decoding the ancient artwork that depicts the trio surrounding a central light is not as straightforward as matching symbols to names. The mural uses a visual language that has been lost. The figures are not labelled. Their positions, the angles of their heads, the way their tails or wings curve. Every detail might carry meaning. Some researchers believe the central light is not Arceus at all, but a representation of the universe itself, and the three are its guardians, not its creators. Others argue the light is a fourth entity, one that was deliberately omitted from later myths. And this is where we enter the realm of the lost verses. Deep within the same cave, beneath layers of dust and fallen rock, fragments of text were uncovered. They are not part of the mural. They were carved separately, perhaps centuries later, by a scribe who was trying to explain the image. Most of the verses are damaged beyond recovery, but a few lines remain legible. One reads, "When the three surround the light, the fourth casts no shadow." Another, "The balance requires a hidden hand, one that does not speak in stone." These phrases are cryptic, but they point to something missing. The lost verses of the Sinjoh myth suggest a fourth member or a hidden balance, a presence that is acknowledged only in the gap between words. What could this fourth element be? Some scholars propose it is the very concept of entropy, the force that opposes creation. Others point to the Distortion world and argue that Giratina was not meant to be the exiled one. Instead, all three were supposed to be paired with an equal opposite. A few desperate theorists even suggest the fourth is a human, a mediator between the divine and the material, but the murals themselves offer no answer. They only show the three and the light, and the empty space around them that seems to ache with absence. How the interpretation of these murals has changed over thousands of years is a story in itself. The earliest inhabitants of Hisui, the clans that predate the Celestica, saw the mural as a map. They believed the central light marked the location of a sacred spring, and the three figures were guardians of the paths leading to it. Later, after the arrival of settlers from other regions, the image was reinterpreted as a religious icon. The three became gods, the light became a creator, and the mural was turned into an altar. Offerings were left, candles were lit, and the original meaning dissolved into ritual. By the time modern archaeologists arrived in the late 20th century, the mural was considered a relic of a primitive faith. They catalogued it, photographed it, and moved on. But recent studies using spectral imaging have revealed something startling. There are faint lines beneath the visible carving, a layer of older art that was deliberately overwritten. That older layer shows four figures, not three. The fourth is faint, almost erased, but it is there. Its form is humanoid, yet not human. It stands opposite the light, as if it is the shadow that the light cannot escape. This discovery has reignited the debate. The mural was not a static record. It was edited, updated, censored. The fourth figure was removed, and the story was rewritten to fit a new understanding of the cosmos. So, what does this mean for our understanding of the creation trio? It suggests that the myth we know is a simplified version of a far more complex reality. The trio may not be a trio at all, but part of a larger system. The light at the center could be the original source, but the three surrounding it might be only half of the equation. The lost verses imply that a hidden balance was broken, and the mural's alteration confirms that someone somewhere decided that the fourth member should be forgotten. But there are other artifacts in Sinjoh that preserve traces of that forgotten presence, not in stone but in the fabric of dreams. The Celestic town murals are silent witnesses, but they are not alone. There is another tradition, one that speaks of a being that does not dwell in time or space, but in the interval between waking and sleep. That being and its counterpart hold their own secrets that may explain why the fourth was erased. And that is a mystery we will uncover next, when we examine the interference of dreams and nightmares, and the role they play in the eternal balance of Sinjoh's creation. The Celestic town murals have been interpreted in many ways, but they never quite explain the empty spaces between the three great figures. There is a gap in the narrative, a shadow that falls where light does not reach. And the oldest scholars of Sinjoh whisper that perhaps the trio was never meant to stand alone. If time and space are the fabric of existence, and antimatter the threat of unraveling, then what force keeps the subconscious mind from collapsing under the weight of such cosmic clarity? The answer may lie not in another member of the creation story, but in two beings who live at the edge of awareness, inside the quiet hours of slumber. Consider how the mind processes the flow of time when you dream. A single dream can stretch across lifetimes or shrink into a single breath. That distortion is not an accident. It is the interference pattern cast by Dialga's influence on the sleeping brain. Without the biological buffer of sleep, we would experience time as raw, uninterrupted linearity, every second pressing against the next until perception itself shatters. Palkia's domain folds space, and the dream world folds geography just as freely, allowing the mind to leap from one memory to a distant landscape in an instant. But who or what governs this ability to warp time and space so gently, without tearing the fabric of sanity? Enter the lunar duo. Darkrai and Cresselia are not merely rare Pokémon. They are the guardians of the threshold between consciousness and the raw chaos of reality. Darkrai rules the nightmare, and Cresselia commands the pleasant dream. Yet together they act as an interface between the sentient mind and the raw domains of the creation trio. Their relationship to Dialga and Palkia is not one of servitude, but of filtration. Without them, the full, unmediated presence of time and space would pour into every dreaming consciousness, overwhelming the senses with impossible timelines and fractured locations. Instead, the lunar duo partially absorbs that energy, sculpting it into narratives that the sleeping mind can process safely. Nightmares are not punishments. They are the overflow of chaotic data that could not be shaped into a coherent dream. That is why victims of Darkrai's terror often report distortions in their sense of time while awake. The filter has been damaged. A deeper theory, one that echoes from the oldest pages of the Canalava library, proposes that dreams and nightmares are not merely shaped by these two, but are actually leakage from the distortion world itself. The distortion world, as we have discussed, is the realm of Giratina, a place where the laws of time and space do not apply. It is a dimension of pure unbound chaos, the residue of creation before structure was imposed. When sentient beings sleep, their subconscious minds briefly disconnect from the strict order of reality, and in that gap, the distortion world bleeds through. This leakage is not harmful in small amounts. It fuels creativity, memory consolidation, and even the occasional prophetic vision. But it is raw, unstable, and needs to be tempered. Cresselia holds back the more violent currents, filtering them into the soft glow of lucid dreams. Darkrai deals with the toxic overflow, trapping the most dangerous fragments inside his domain of nightmares, so that they do not poison the waking world. This role of the subconscious is vital to the stability of the trio's influence over sentient life. If every creature experienced the full weight of Dialga's temporal presence while awake, the mind would fracture, unable to reconcile past, present, and future as separate streams. The subconscious acts as a shock absorber, a place where time can run backward, where space can fold, where Giratina's shadow can dance harmlessly before being ejected upon waking. Darkrai and Cresselia are the gatekeepers of that buffer. Without them, the equilibrium that Arceus designed would break, and the constant input from the creation trio would drive every thinking being into madness. This is why the legends so often tie sleep to the moon, and the moon to balance. We have seen murals depict Dialga and Palkia above the sleeping forms of early humans, with Cresselia holding a crescent and Darkrai shrouded in a dark circle. Those are not decorative flourishes. They are warnings and reassurances. The subconscious mind is the final stage of creation, the place where the raw energy of time, space, and antimatter is woven into a sustainable existence. But what happens when that leakage becomes a flood? When the filter fails and the distortion world pours through without restraint? Then the boundary between dream and reality dissolves entirely. That is the moment everything changes. when the very concept of a stable timeline begins to erode, and the waking world itself becomes a nightmare from which there is no escape. This is not a distant threat. It is the fracture line that leads directly into the collapse of reality. But what happens when that leakage becomes something far more than a nightmare? When the very fabric of reality begins to unravel, not from the interference of a dream entity, but from the quiet, terrifying absence of one of the fundamental pillars of existence itself. Dreams, after all, are echoes. The distortion world bleeds into our sleep, and Darkrai and Cresselia are only the gatekeepers of that border. But borders imply separation, and separation implies space. And space in the Sinjoh mythos is not a backdrop, it is a living being. Palkia does not merely govern space. Palkia, the concept of distance, the relationship between all points, the very stage upon which reality performs its endless play. So consider for a moment a world where that stage collapses. Consider the disappearance of one member of the trio. We have spoken of the cosmic balance between Dialga, Palkia and Giratina. We have spoken of the hierarchy, the thousand arms of Arceus, the quiet exile of the Renegade. But we have never asked the question that the ancient murals of Celestic Town seem to hint at with their missing verses. What if the balance is not just broken, but emptied? What if Palkia, the spatial god, simply ceased to be? The immediate physical consequences would be beyond any earthquake or supernova. Without Palkia, the universe would lose the concept of distance. Not that distances would become infinite or zero. They would simply stop existing as a measurable property. 2 points could no longer be separated because the idea of between would have no meaning. Objects would occupy the same location, not because they are forced together, but because there is no longer any way to define their separation. You would not be able to move your hand away from your face, because the notion of away would be absent from the cosmic grammar. In that first instant, everything that exists would occupy a single dimensionless point, a singularity not of gravity, but of definition. And yet the story does not end there. In our universe, time and space are intertwined. They are not separate forces, but two aspects of the same continuum. If Palkia's spatial function evaporates, Dialga's domain begins to falter as well. Without space, events cannot be meaningfully ordered, because there is no location in which events can occur. Time itself becomes a tautology, a sequence without positions. The slow decay of matter in a universe where time has ceased to function is not a dramatic explosion, but a whisper. Entropy, the measure of disorder, relies on the flow of time to increase. Without time, entropy freezes, but matter is not static. At the quantum level, particles are in constant motion, and that motion requires both time and space to be defined. When both collapse, matter begins to lose its cohesion. Particles stop interacting because interaction requires distance. Atoms cannot bond because there is no space for the bond to exist. Slowly, at the level of quarks and electrons, matter dissolves into a kind of potentiality, a sea of probabilities that can never resolve into actual particles. The world does not shatter, it fades, like a photograph left too long in the sun. And what of Giratina, the renegade, the antimatter counterpart, the one who was banished to the distortion world for its violent nature? Would it remain untouched, or would the collapse of its two siblings draw it into a new role? The distortion world is a place where the normal laws of space and time do not apply, but it is still a place. If space as a whole disappears, the distortion world itself might become the only remaining pocket of existence, a bubble of reversed gravity and twisted dimensions, floating in a void that no longer has a name. Giratina, once a threat to be contained, would become the sole custodian of the last fragments of reality, a lonely god staring into a non-existent distance. These are not idle fantasies. The Celestic Town murals, if interpreted through the lens of this hypothetical, show the trio surrounding a central light, but one of the figures is always slightly apart, its form obscured by a crack in the stone. Some scholars believe that crack represents a fracture in the myth itself, a warning that the absence of any one member is not just a loss, but a total unraveling. The Forgotten Verses, it is said, describe a time when the cosmos was nearly unmade by an error, a misstep in creation. Arceus, according to those fragments, had to intervene directly, not to restore, but to re-establish the very definitions of space and time from the raw material of what remained. So when we speak of the lore of the creation trio, we are speaking of a universe held together by the presence of three beings. Remove one, and the entire structure becomes a memory. And there are those who would seek to exploit that fragility for their own designs. We ended the last chapter with a thought experiment. What if one of the creation trio simply vanished? Without Dialga, time would become a stagnant pool, every moment frozen in place. Without Palkia, the very concept of distance would dissolve, and you could reach out to touch a star without ever moving. But that was only a conjecture, a mental exercise to grasp the fragility of our reality. What if someone didn't want to remove just one piece of the cosmic machinery, but to tear the entire engine down and build something else entirely? That was the ambition of one man, a man who looked at the universe and saw only imperfection. His name was Cyrus, and his plan was the most audacious and chilling plot in the history of the Pokémon world. Cyrus was not an ordinary villain. He didn't seek power for its own sake, nor did he want to rule over others. He wanted to erase everything. To understand why, you have to understand his philosophy on the spirit. He saw human emotion, and by extension, the emotions of all living things, as a flaw, a disease that corrupted the pure logic of existence. He believed that the spirit, that intangible essence that gives rise to joy, sorrow, love, and hatred, was the source of all conflict and suffering. If you could remove the spirit, you would create a world without pain, a world without want, a world without the messy unpredictability of life. But how do you remove something so fundamental? You don't just delete a feature, you redesign the entire operating system of reality. This is where the creation trio enters his calculus. Cyrus understood, perhaps better than anyone, that Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina are not simply powerful Pokémon. They are the very pillars on which existence rests. Time gives order, space gives dimension, and the distortion world gives a shadow boundary. To create a world without emotion, you cannot simply command people to stop feeling. You have to rewrite the laws of physics, the fabric of consciousness itself, and only beings that govern the fundamental dimensions of reality could accomplish that. He needed to capture Dialga and Palkia to take control of time and space, and then use their combined power to trigger a new beginning. But the irony is staggering. He intended to use the gods of reality to delete reality itself. The very entities that hold the cosmos together would be turned into tools for its destruction. Think about the paradox. Dialga and Palkia are not malevolent. They are neutral forces, the clockwork of existence. When Cyrus tried to bend them to his will, he was essentially trying to force the sun to go out by commanding the sunrise. But he had a plan. He used the red chain, a device forged from the power of Uxie, Azelf, and Mesprit, the late guardians of knowledge, willpower, and emotion. In a twisted symmetry, he used the essence of the spirit trio to imprison the creation trio. He believed that by capturing their power, he could suppress the very thing that made life chaotic: emotion. Yet the lake guardians themselves are embodiments of the spirit. He was using the source of emotion to destroy emotion. The moment when Cyrus commands Dialga and Palkia to create a new universe is one of the most haunting scenes in Pokémon lore. He stands in the Spear Pillar, the summit of Mount Coronet, the very place where Arceus first shaped the world. The sky tears open. The fabric of time and space becomes visible, twisting and vibrating. But the new world he envisions is not a paradise of logic. It is a sterile void, a place without life, without history, without dreams. He doesn't understand that a universe without emotion is also a universe without meaning. By removing the spirit, he would remove the very reason for existence. The creation trio, forced to obey, are themselves beings of immense spiritual presence. They are not machines. They have names. They have will, and that will resists. In the end, His plan fails not because his logic was flawed, but because the spirit cannot be extinguished by force. The very act of trying to control the trio through the red chain was an act of will, an act of emotion. He wanted to create a world without emotion, but he was driven by his own emotional pain, his hatred of the imperfect world. The irony cuts deep, and when you consider that Cyrus himself is a human being, a being with a spirit, his entire crusade was doomed from the start. The tools of creation are not neutral. They are infused with the essence of Arceus, the original source of all spirit. But what happens to a world that narrowly escapes such a cosmic reset? The damage lingers. The distortion world remains as a scar, a place where the rules of reality are unstable. And some say that Cyrus's ambition did not truly die, it was merely postponed. There is a cycle, a repetition of creation and destruction that echoes through the ages. Arceus itself is said to be part of an eternal cycle, a dance of becoming and unbecoming, and the next chapter in that cycle is already stirring, waiting to unfold. Cyrus believed that the spirit was the source of all human weakness, that emotion and desire were impurities that polluted the world. He sought to use the power of Dialga and Palkia to erase that very essence, to create a universe without spirit, without will, without the unpredictable chaos of feeling. But what Cyrus failed to grasp, what his cold and calculating mind could never accept, is that the so-called spirit is not merely a byproduct of existence. It is the very engine of the cycle. And the cycle, the eternal cycle, is older than any plan he ever formulated. The theory that the universe is periodically destroyed and remade by the trio is not a fringe idea whispered in forgotten ruins. It is written in the geometry of reality itself. Every civilization that has ever risen in the Pokémon world, from the earliest human tribes to the advanced societies of modern Unova, has left behind traces of a pattern that repeats, the same catastrophes, the same resurgences, the same three figures, Dialga, Palkia and Giratina, emerging from the void to tear down what was built and then rebuild it from the ashes. This is not a myth of a single creation. It is a record of countless creations, each one a fresh canvas painted over a previous masterpiece. The most compelling evidence, the previous worlds, lies hidden within the depths of the distortion world. That place is not merely a prison for Giratina, nor a simple reflection of our own reality. It is a graveyard of timelines. Deep in its crystalline caverns, where gravity bends in impossible directions, and the air hums with the static of dead universes, researchers have discovered remnants that should not exist. Stone tablets etched with scripts that predate any known language. Fossils of creatures that never appear in any evolutionary tree. Architectural fragments that suggest a civilization advanced beyond our own, yet utterly absent from history. These are the echoes of worlds that were unmade, preserved in the twisted space of the distortion world, like insects trapped in amber. Giratina, the one who was cast out for its violence, may actually serve as the keeper of these memories. Its domain is the place where the broken pieces of reality are stored. When the cycle resets, when Dialga rewinds time and Palkia reshapes space, the old universe is not erased. It is shunted into the distortion world, where it continues to exist in a half-life, forever out of phase, yet forever present. This is why the distortion world feels so alien, so wrong. It is a landfill of past creations, a repository of every failed attempt at permanence. But there is one anomaly that reappears in every cycle, one constant that the trio cannot seem to account for. That anomaly is you, the player character. Across every legend, every documented reset, there is evidence of a singular human who appears at the critical moment. A child from a distant town, arriving in the region just as the trio is about to clash. This figure is not chosen by Arceus or by any divine plan. They are an unintended variable, a glitch in the system. They stand at the crossroads of time and space, wielding their own will against the gods, and they always succeed in bringing the cycle to a halt, at least temporarily. The role of the player character as a recurring anomaly in the trio's history suggests something profound. Perhaps the spirit that Cyrus tried to erase. The will, the emotion, the irrational hope, is the only force that can break the eternal cycle. Each time the trio prepares to wipe the slate clean, a person appears who refuses to accept that fate. They are not a chosen one. They are a mistake, a beautiful error that repeats itself. Because the universe cannot help but create beings with the power to say no. And that is where we find ourselves now, standing on the edge of yet another reset. The Distortion world contains evidence of worlds long gone, but it also holds clues to what may come next. If the cycle is truly eternal, then our world too will one day be shunted into that forgotten realm, unless someone again defies the pattern. But the story does not end here. The myths of the trio have evolved over time, and the modern age has given them new meanings. In the next chapter, we will explore the modern mythos, how these ancient beings are reinterpreted in the light of contemporary science, video games, and even folklore, how the trio has escaped the pages of legend and become part of our present understanding of reality itself. Chapter 26. The Modern Mythos. The evidence of previous worlds hidden within the Distortion world suggests that the cycle of destruction and renewal is not just a theory, but a pattern etched into the very fabric of reality. But if the universe has been remade countless times, what does that mean for the present? How do we, in the modern age of Pokémon research, reconcile the ancient myths with the cold data of laboratory instruments? The answer lies in a quiet, intellectual revolution that has transformed the worship of gods into the observation of fundamental forces. Today, in the Sinjoh region, the Celestic town murals are no longer merely objects of reverence. They are studied by geologists, physicists, and historians alike. Transition from religious worship to technological observation of time and space began not with a single breakthrough, but with a slow accumulation of evidence that the trio are not supernatural beings in the old sense, but personifications of cosmic constants that can be measured, predicted, and even interacted with. Researchers at the Canal of Library have spent decades correlating ancient texts with seismic data from Mount Coronet. The temporal anomalies recorded across Sinjoh correspond precisely with periods of high spiritual activity mentioned in the legends. Current scientific research in the Pokémon world views the trio as manifestations of space-time itself. Dialga is no longer just a god of time. It is the axis upon which the entropy gradient of the universe depends. Palkia is not merely a deity of space. It is the metric that defines distance and dimension. And Giratina, once seen as the wrathful exile, is now understood in some circles as the embodiment of antimatter, or the fundamental asymmetry that prevents total symmetry, a necessary counterpart that ensures stability through opposition. Laboratories in Jubilife City use simulated space-time distortions to study how Dialga and Palkia might interact with experimental technology, treating them as natural phenomena rather than objects of prayer. The lingering presence of the trio in the modern day is subtle but undeniable. It whispers in the strange fluctuations of the Pokédex's chronometer near certain ruins. It surfaces in the unexplained calm that falls over a battle when a Dialga's roar echoes from a trail camera in the tundra. It is felt in the way space seems to bend around areas where Palkia was once sighted, creating pockets of altered gravity that geographers still cannot fully explain. These are not dramatic interventions. They are the quiet pulse of the cosmos, a reminder that the forces that built the world are still breathing, still watching from a distance. In a sense, we have not abandoned worship. We have simply changed the form. The incense we burn now is data. The altars we build are particle colliders. The prayers we offer are measurement equations. And yet for all our advanced instruments, the trio remain elusive. They do not answer our tests with clarity. They respond with more questions, more paradoxes, more doors into the unknown. Perhaps that is the nature of true gods. They do not reveal themselves to scrutiny but to faith, even when that faith is dressed in a lab coat. As we approach the final chapter of this journey, we must ask ourselves, If the trio are the guardians of the present reality, what happens when that reality itself is a fragile balance? What is the final balance that all these cycles have been building toward? That is the question we will explore next in Chapter 27. The final balance. So the modern world of Pokémon has moved beyond myth. Time is measured in atomic clocks, space in light years, and the distortion world itself has become a subject of theoretical physics, studied from the safety of laboratories in Sinjoh. The ancient carvings on Mount Coronet have become artifacts, and the hymns once sung to Dialga and Palkia have been replaced by the hum of machinery. But this transition from worship to observation, from prayer to experiment, only sharpened the central question that the old legends tried to answer. If time and space are the fundamental fabric of reality, then what holds that fabric together? Why does it not simply rip itself apart? The answer, as the modern scientists began to suspect, lies in the very tension that the ancients feared. The universe is not a peaceful garden. It is a battlefield, and the battle is the only thing keeping it alive. The three beings Arceus created were not three separate gods ruling three separate kingdoms. They were three opposing forces locked in a single system, each one pulling against the other two. Dialga drags everything forward along an axis that has no beginning or end. Palkia expands outward in every direction at once, defining where things are and how far apart they can be. And then there is Giratina, the Renegade, the one who does not push forward or outward, but who pulls sideways into the cracks between the lines. This is the necessity of the Renegade in Arceus's grand design. To understand it, we have to abandon the idea that Giratina was a mistake, a flawed creation that was punished and exiled. The distortion world is not a prison. It is a balancing chamber. Think of time and space as two massive gears turning against each other. If they were perfectly aligned, if they meshed without any friction, the universe would grind to a halt. There would be no change, no growth, no possibility. Time would flow in a straight line, but there would be nowhere for it to go. Space would exist, but it would be a perfect static block. The engine of reality needs friction. It needs something that resists, that twists, that creates the slight wobble that prevents the whole machine from seizing up. That wobble is the distortion world, and Giratina is the force that generates it. When time and space press against each other, some energy leaks out. That leakage is not waste. It is the raw material of possibility. Dreams, nightmares, alternate realities, the strange paths that connect one moment to another without passing through the minutes in between. This is the domain of the Renegade. Without Giratina, time and space would be a perfect featureless monotony. With it, they become a living, breathing system that can create, destroy, and recreate itself endlessly. And this brings us to the realization that has haunted every researcher who has dared to study the trio in depth. Perfection requires imperfection. The universe cannot exist without a distortion. It is a paradox that lies at the heart of Sinjoh's mythology, a paradox that Cyrus himself could not accept. He wanted a world without spirit, without emotion, without the messy unpredictability that makes life both beautiful and painful. But what he did not see was that the very thing he hated, the spirit he called it, was the same thing that gave time and space their power. Remove the distortion, remove the Renegade, and you do not get a perfect world. You get nothing at all. A void without motion, without change, without even the possibility of a single thought. The tension between Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina is the engine that drives the universe. Each one limits the other two. Time prevents space from expanding infinitely and tearing everything apart. Space gives time a stage on which to play out its endless story, and Giratina ensures that neither of them can ever become too dominant. When time grows too rigid, the distortion lets a little chaos slip in. When space becomes too vast, the distortion allows things to fold and touch in ways they should not. It is a delicate dance, and it has been running since the first moment Arceus opened its eyes on the void. The ancients may have worshipped these beings as gods, but they understood something that the modern scientists are only beginning to rediscover. You cannot separate the three. You cannot remove one and expect the others to remain. They are not three pillars holding up a roof. They are three legs of a tripod, and if you break one, the whole structure falls. And this is where the story of the modern mythos comes back to the oldest truth. The distortion world is not a cursed realm. It is the shadow that allows the light to have shape. Without it, there would be no darkness, no contrast, no way to tell where one thing ends and another begins. Giratina is not the villain of the creation story. It is the necessary opposite that gives meaning to everything else. When you look up at the stars on a clear night in the Sinjoh region, you are seeing time and space working together. But if you could see the space between the stars, the empty darkness that seems to hold nothing, you would be seeing Giratina. It is in every gap, every silence, every moment of uncertainty. And it is precisely that uncertainty that allows the universe to continue. Now, as we close this chapter, we have to ask ourselves what happens to this legacy once it is fully understood. The scientists of the modern era have mapped the distortion world. They have measured the energies that flow between the three beings, but they have not yet mastered them. The balance is still fragile, and the next step in this story, the legacy of creation itself, will reveal what happens when knowledge turns into power, when the same forces that built reality are no longer worshipped or observed, but wielded. The universe may have been born from a single egg, but its future depends on something far more dangerous. The hands that hold the keys to the final balance. We have walked the path of the balance, understanding that time, space, and the distortion that opposes them are not merely forces but personalities, functions made flesh, given will and instinct. The tension between Dialga and Palkia, the way Giratina stands as the necessary shadow, the engine that keeps the cosmos from collapsing into either perfect order or total chaos. But if that tension is the engine, then what is the destination? What is the legacy of these three beings, carved into the very fabric of Sinjoh, of Hisui, of every region that has ever looked to the sky and wondered? The creation trio is not a story we can dismiss with a simple summary. It is the ultimate mystery of the Pokémon lore, not because we lack information, but because the information itself points to something larger than any single game, any one legend, any recorded myth. These three were born from the same primordial egg that hatched Arceus. Yet they are not equals to their creator. They are vessels, living concepts, the scaffolding upon which reality was hung. To understand them is to understand the structure of existence itself. Consider the enduring power of the Sinjoh myths, how they have shaped the identity of the world across every generation. When a child in the Unova region learns about Reshiram and Zekrom, they are learning about truth and ideals within a human conflict. When a trainer in Hosa meets the Weather Trio, they encounter the raw forces of nature. But the creation trio, they are not forces of nature. They are the laws that make nature possible. Time must flow for a storm to form. Space must exist for the land to spread. And behind all of it, the distortion, the antimatter, the shadow reality that ensures no system becomes too rigid, too fragile, too perfect to survive a single moment's change. The myths of Sinjoh, of Mount Coronet, of the Spear Pillar, of the Three Lakes and the Guardians of Knowledge, Emotion and Willpower. These are not just stories, they are echoes of an actual event, a moment when the void split open and became something. And the fact that we can visit those places, that we can stand on the summit of Mount Coronet and feel the wind, that we can descend into the distortion world and see the impossible geometry with our own eyes, that is the miracle. The Pokémon world does not just tell us about its gods, it lets us walk through their tombs, their temples, their forgotten corners of creation. And yet, for all our exploration, the trio remains essentially unknown. We can battle them, capture them, store them in a box, or even use their power in battle, but they are never truly ours. Their essence is beyond our grasp. Dialga will always be time itself, not a creature in a ball. Palkia will always be the expanse between stars, not a simple dragon with pearls on its shoulders. and Giratina will always be the exile, the one who was banished not for a crime but for what it is. The necessary opposition, the force that ensures creation is never static. That is the final thought we leave here, the core of this mythos. The creation trio is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mirror held up to the structure of the universe, in them the reflection of our own reality. Time, space, and the strange, unstable edges where those two break down, and the silence of the void, the emptiness from which Arceus first emerged. That silence is not empty, it is full of potential. It is the blank page before the first word, the quiet before the first note of the song of the cosmos. We close this chapter with a reflection, not on the answers, but on the beauty of the question itself. The structured cosmos, so elegant, so fragile, so dependent on the constant dance of three beings who cannot rest, and the myths that rise from that dance shape everything in the Pokémon world. The towers of Sinjoh, the caves of the Distortion world, the legends passed down through generations. The legacy of creation is not in what was made, but in the act of making, and in the eternal acknowledgement that even gods must exist within a framework. And so we step back from the summit of Mount Coronet, from the edge of the Distortion world, from the heart of the spear pillar. We let the silence return. But now we know it is not an empty silence. It is the space between the tick of Dialga's heartbeat, the stretch of Palkia's breath, and the shadow of Giratina's turning. And that is enough. That is the legacy. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.